What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto rejected his family name and built a new legacy in blood? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto knew it was suicidal. There was no big sign to tell him it was so, no person to inform him, no cosmic revelation to predict that what he was about to do would either put the whole planet in jeopardy due to some reality-breaking stuff he didn't have the brains to completely comprehend, or Madara would just survive it and then the shit would really hit the fan this time. Too bad that whether he could pull it off or not, he wouldn't be around to see what his actions would do to the world. He was 22 years old, 23 if he'd survive for another 6 weeks, and the so-called child of the prophecy who would be the turning point of the ninja world. Bring the world to darkness or save it with all the imperfections intact. Tough choice, didn't mean he could choose with just mere words. Actions were the medium for his choice, and quite frankly it wasn't enough to get what he wanted out of the Morton's fork, choosing between a rock and a hard place and all that. Therefore, he was left with the default option. Let the world be subjected to Madara's global illusion. But many people had counted on him, sacrificed their lives for him. If he were to give up now, then everything they had done for him would just be in vain. And Naruto was too honor-bound to let the lives of his precious people be wasted because of his resignation to fate. He didn't believe it, after all, so why should he? He was Naruto Uzumaki, the epitome of diehard. The war had escalated to continental proportions, and nothing was spared from Madara's tyranny in the land. Naruto conducted a special mission to breach through Madara's base of operations, bypass all of his guards, including Kabuto, the Orochi wannabe, and face the man himself. But this would not be completed without a diversion to drive most of Madara's forces and the Biju away from the final battle. Most of the plan had been flawless, and why wouldn't it? Shikamaru was the one who thought it up, but fighting Madara was no easy task in and of itself. Naruto had to use every trick up his sleeve and the lessons he had learned throughout the years before he could even get close to the guy and seal up his teleportation ability or whatever he called it. Now it was just a simple case of killing the guy permanently. Not much success in that department, apparently. Madara also had a few more tricks up his sleeve, and Naruto had been ill-prepared. Naruto was beaten, his team wiped out, leaving him the sole survivor of the botched-up mission. And now Madara was finalizing the ritual in reconstructing the Jubi since the final piece of the puzzle had waltzed right into his greedy hands. How fucked up could this get? So here Naruto was now, in the middle of another Morton's fork for him to decide the fate of the world and also his own. You see, during his training in mastering the Biju inside him, he stumbled upon an ancient technique that had been created by the legendary Rikudo Sennin himself. Apparently, the man had a slight case of autophobia, fear of his own self. Rather, he was afraid of the beast he had sealed within himself taking over his mind and continuing its carnage at the world. So what better way to prevent such a tragedy from ever occurring again by simply dying and then dragging the beast with you to the pits of hell? Yes, this was why Naruto knew it was suicidal. It was a suicide jutsu from the very start. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the person's viewpoint, the jutsu was made solely for a Jubi Jinchuriki's suicide attempt. Therefore the backlash of the Kyuubi's destruction would be catastrophic since it is pretty much unstable and incomplete chakra fueled by human malice and hatred. Destruction awaited this place and he was sure that the surrounding little towns near here would no doubt be affected by the blast, but it was the only way to ensure the safety of the world. Well, at least safety from Madara's Iron Fist tyranny, he supposed. Frankly, after what happened throughout his 22 years of life in this world and how whatever deity watching over them seemed to look the other way when good people, even Naruto's precious people, die because of their involvement with the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, he began to care less and less of what would happen to the world and the people in it. Not enough to disregard the slaying of innocents, though. Apart from his precious people, he would just tell everyone else to go copulate themselves. He didn't know when he had been dubbed cynical and a smartass, but he'd rather think of them as the symptoms of the next stage of his coping mechanism when the whole blonde idiot who is always happy-go-lucky facade began to show its age and dullness. His new attitude sure gave him a new life outlook and lots of ammunition for disparaging his opponents, but it also distanced him with his precious people. There was no use thinking anything else. All of his loved ones were dead, and he'd really like to at least kill the antique Uchiha before he met his end. So he asked himself mere seconds away from forming the 2 final hand seals of the suicide jutsu. What awaits me after death? No one was there to give him an answer. And it was probably for the better. The jutsu did its part quite nicely, and the image of seeing Madara Uchiha disintegrate into dust, screaming and squirming, right in front of his eyes before the cold, dank clutches of death gripped his soul and claimed him was undoubtedly priceless. With the prophecy fulfilled, somewhat, Naruto Uzumaki died with a smile. But why'd I get the feeling that it's not yet RIP for me? Naruto came to that question when he had finally lost every feeling in his 5 senses. And he was beginning to think that the deity that pretty much liked screwing up his life with prophecies and wars and all that life is unfair montage was not yet done with its little human toy. His senses only had a momentary pause before they reset. First off was touch. And boy did it welcome him with a warm embrace, a scorching, pain-inducing embrace that made Sasuke's improved Tsukuyomi attack feel like a baby's slap. It was almost like the Kyuubi's chakra engulfing his very soul with its malevolent will, like it was angry or annoyed. Or probably PM Sing without menstruating. The fox definitely needed some anger management. Next came the smell. The environment had that familiar scent in his fragmented memories of being rushed into the operating room and Tsunade Ba-chan saving his life at one time or another, though he couldn't for the life of him understand why he recalled the OR's scent, of all things. He also smelled blood, and he was certain it was his. His taste buds then kicked in and he could even taste the thick liquid in his mouth. His sense of hearing returned, too, and he listened to the frantic orders and mutters of the doctors and nurses inside the room. The constant beeping of a heart monitor next to him. There was one voice in the group that was much louder than the others. Her no-nonsense tone and steeled emotions even in the face of a patient lying between the boundaries of life and death were enough hints for Naruto to guess that it was Tsunade leading the operation. But then a simple memory came back to his groggy mind, and Naruto realized that his guess was only wishful thinking. Tsunade had been dead for 4 months now. It was probably someone who sounded like her. Yeah, just to be sure that his eyesight hadn't been damaged from the supposed suicide jutsu. Never trust old scrolls again. He let them slowly bathe into the glaring lights above him. Squinted at first, so as not to be overwhelmed. His eyes blinked while opening a tad bit wider for every interval. His strength was low and his breathing ragged. An oxygen mask was on his mouth and the nurses were rushing left and right inside his peripheral vision. But they had the shapes of blobs in distorted white and fleshy colors. His overall vision was as blurry as a camera out of focus. Damn it, he's not responding to the meds. The Tsunade-like voice cursed. It's his healing factor, one of the nurses said. His body is probably counteracting them. Shit, give him another shot and double the dosage. We can't risk him waking up at a time like this. But, Tsunade-sama, he's already close to overdosing and with his immune system Just do it. The nurse seemed to hesitate. Then, yes, ma'am. Whatever anesthesia they administered to his body took effect almost immediately. His regained senses weakened and dulled, and their embrace was replaced with the cold arms of sleep. Darn. He wanted to check if he heard the nurse right when she called that blonde-haired doctor, Tsunade-sama. Maybe it was just a woman with the same name as the Godem Hokage. Maybe. And Naruto knew no more. As the red lights of the OR sign flickered and then faded, a buxom blonde in a surgeon's outfit walked out of the double doors below the sign, her expression weary and exhausted. Sitting alone on one of the chairs next to the OR was an equally tired woman, who stood right up when the blonde neared her. She had that stance that made her seem prepared for the blunt truth of the situation's severity. Needless to say, the woman wasn't expecting a great resolution to all this. We did all we could, the blonde said after a long sigh, her brown eyes looking straight at the other woman's worried gray eyes. He'll be fine, but the damage was, she paused, not sure how to word it without making it too blunt for the receiver, life-threatening. Crap, still blunt. Ah well, she wasn't always good at this kind of thing, which was why she let the nurses talk to the people in the waiting room instead of her. Whether in physical strength or verbal declarations, she didn't hold back her punches. But she couldn't do it this time because the patient and the patient's mother were people she knew deeply. The gray-eyed woman licked her dry lips. Is Naruto going to be 100% okay? I doubt it. Scarred, but he'll pull through. Thought we lost him for a couple minutes, but his healing factor alone restarted his heart, surprising everyone in the operating room. I thought I'd never see the day to be thankful for the Kyuubi's presence inside him. The woman brushed strands of her long crimson hair behind her ear. She meant for the sentence to be taken lightly, but in her tired state it almost sounded cynical. I wouldn't think so. Why? If it hadn't been for the Kyuubi, he wouldn't have gotten hurt in the first place. You weren't here when he was brought in. He had multiple deep gashes with faint traces of wind chakra. His skull was cracked in 2 places, blunt force. No signs of brain damage, again, courtesy of his healing factor. He also had 8 kunai embedded on his back. 1 punctured his left lung, 2 were dangerously close from stabbing his heart and spinal cord. When that Anbu operative arrived in the hospital's doorstep, I thought that he was carrying a bloody piece of meat he got from the slaughterhouse. Never in my years as a medic nin could prepare me to see a 5-year-old child look so. The woman sobbed. I failed him. I told him that I'd protect him, yet She sat back down, drowning in the sorrow of her mistake. The blonde stood there, unsure how to proceed. She had no previous experience with consoling people after the news was broken to them, but this was a different case. For one, the patient didn't die. But still, the woman breaking down in front of her was the only kunoichi who was able to convince her to stay in Konoha, and by doing so, she was able to regain something she had lost and the old wounds had finally begun to heal. Kushina, she called, sitting down on the seat next to the redhead, it's going to be all right. Her hand went to the woman's shoulder. I put too much faith in this village. She clenched her fists. Only a ninja could have done those things to my son. A ninja blinded with hatred. I'll be sure to report this to the Hokage as soon as possible. The Anbu only found him by chance. He had been left for dead. Where's Naruto now? He's being moved into a new room. We gave him enough sedatives to sleep through the night and probably for the rest of the morning, so I suggest you catch some shut-eye too. No, Kushina retorted. I want to be with Naruto. I can't leave him alone after what happened tonight. I knew you'd say that. The blonde smiled. That's why I specified that Naruto be moved into a room with 2 beds. She understood the implications right away. But Tsunade Ba-chan. Tsunade shook her head, raising a hand in gesture for her to be silent. Come on, I'll take you there. Thank you. I'm the kid's godmother. Tsunade had a smirk on her face. No harm in a bit of spoiling, right? Naruto had grown used to the swift change in perception even when he hadn't been into this place for a long time. From the encroaching darkness flooding his vision until sleep came for him to the feeling of being wide awake inside the dank and reddish sewers of the fox's mindscape intertwined with his own. But the feel of the place seemed off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the place looked to be less dank, maybe. Wonder what the furball wants. Naruto usually didn't acquaint himself with the fox, and the few times he had come to this mindscape was only because of chance or desperation or both. The fox hated him, and he hated the fox. It was as simple as that. Maybe when he was still a teen, he must have wished for a harmonious relationship with his tenant, but after years and years of trying to get the fox to see reason and make it stay inside his belly less of a nightmare getting rejected at every turn, he began to lose hope of ever taming the beast completely like Killer Bee did. Before that special mission which inadvertently led him to his current predicament, he had mastered the Kyuubi's demonic chakra and could take it from the fox at will, but the way he was taking it was considered stealing than willingly given. As such, his prowess was still incomplete. Still, it was better than nothing, and the added control over the demonic cloak was a godsend whenever he was ambushed by bounty hunters who took up Madara's offer. So with all that said, it left Naruto to wonder why he had come into the mindscape. He wasn't the one who made the house call, after all. Walking along the one-way path, he wandered through intersections and dark corridors. The only way for him to get some answers was to find the main room where the fox resided behind its cage, but Naruto found no sense of familiarity inside this sewer maze. Even in his brief stays within the mindscape before this one had come with that feeling of instinct where his legs did the traveling while his thoughts observed the shapes and colors of the place and memorizing the corridors he passed. He used that knowledge to work his way around the place now, but it was like giving a blind man a map to read. In a nutshell, he was lost inside his own mind. How more fucked could he be? Time had a different meaning inside a mindscape, though, so Naruto couldn't be sure if 3 hours really did pass or just 3 minutes. With his rotten luck in the past few months, he wouldn't be surprised if he had been asleep for 3 whole days. Regardless, he had finally found the lair of the great, bad fox. The sight that welcomed him was the usual cage and the seal embedded at the center, but there was a slight addition in the center of the room. There was a little boy in here, sleeping on ankle-deep water. The weird thing about it was that the kid was floating like a boat. Huh, you don't see that every day, Naruto muttered. He walked towards the kid, spotting his dark red hair and whiskered cheeks. Naruto unconsciously traced his own marks. Whether it was because the kid sensed his presence or the low growl coming from the beast inside its cage woke him up, Naruto knew that it was best to hide in the shadows. He wanted to know at least a bit more about the kid before he confronted him, wanted to discern if this was just a ploy for the fox to try and escape its prison. The boy rose, rubbing his eyes to ward off the rest of his sleep. When he raised his arms to stretch, his floating ability somehow deactivated and he was left sputtering and struggling through very shallow water, panicking that he was drowning and he wanted his mommy. Naruto found the scene very much hilarious, and he had to bite his lip to silence the booming laugh that wanted to burst out of his mouth. He also tried to minimize the shaking of his shoulders. No luck with that. His amusement had to have some outlet for its release. When the kid had calmed down, berating himself that he got excited over water that couldn't possibly drown him, another low growl coming from the other side of Seal got his attention. "Come here, Kit," the low voice of the Kyuubi ordered. The boy stiffened, almost struggling, then came closer to the bars of the Kyuubi's prison. Yes, just like that. Closer. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This scene looked familiar, a faint recollection of what occurred back when he first encountered the fox behind its cage. The kid didn't seem to look afraid or even taking cautious steps towards the voice that undoubtedly sounded like a pedophilic stalker charming his newest boy toy. It made Naruto feel ill just thinking of it, but he was more worried about the boy than the unnecessary images he implanted into his thoughts. He was getting too close to the prison, and Naruto just knew that it wouldn't end well. "Get away from there," Naruto yelled, breaking the boy out of his trance and making him stop mid-stride, right before the malevolent presence of the Kyuubi's paw shot out to try and grab the boy. The boy escaped by a hair-thin gap between his face and those sharp giant claws. And like all kids that got scared out of their minds, he bolted away from the seal, screaming, "Monster!" But he must have momentarily forgotten about the ankle-deep water his feet were in, and he tripped and splashed face first into it. With a sigh, Naruto stepped out of the shadows and confronted the towering appearance of the Kyuubi. "What's the big idea, furball?" The Kyuubi only shot a glance before he started bashing his claws at his prison. You, yeah, Kyuubi, it's me, myself, and I too starstruck to politely say, "May I have your autograph?" "You insolent monkey, I'll kill you. Come on, furball, I know you can threaten me better than that. Where's the killing intent, the passion, the compulsion, the slight hitch in your voice whenever you try to say, 'I'm gay'?" The fox's eyes narrowed. "I've never said such a thing." "Oh, I love, really," he continued with that slight hitch. "I said I never said such things." Naruto raised a brow. "Prove it." "Okay, then, wait. Damn you, how dare you mock me?" He noticed it just now, huh? It's better than staying quiet and absorb your verbal abuse. He shrugged. "I'd like to think I'm retaliating than insulting you." The Kyuubi growled ferociously. "Mark my words, Yondaime, I will have your head for this." Yondaime? Naruto chose to ignore it for the time being. Well, he should wrap this up. He already had his fun with the furball. He glanced at the boy, seeing that he was looking at him and the giant fox back and forth with a look of utter bewilderment. Looking bored at the Kyuubi, he said, "So why were you trying to lead this kid into your lair? You sounded like a sick pedophile with that voice earlier." The Kyuubi kept bashing at its cage. The floor rattled due to the impact as the fox strained itself in getting out of its damn prison, so that it could grab the blonde nuisance and be sure to deliver a very painful end to his unfortunate soul. "I don't think I'll be getting much answers from him in his rage," Naruto commented, more likely talking to himself than directing his speech to the boy standing beside him. Still, the boy looked at him and nodded. "Well, Kyuubi, if you can still listen to me, I'd like to just say that we're leaving. No offense, but your mere presence is scaring the kid half to death. Then let your monkey brat die so you wouldn't have to worry about him being half dead," the Kyuubi growled, still on his mad but futile rampage inside its prison. Nah, that's a horrible idea, he said offhandedly. His next sentence was directed to the boy. Let's say we go somewhere quiet. With a snap of his fingers, Naruto and the boy were transported into the White Room. This had been the same place he and his father had that final father and son talk before Naruto had to come back to the real world to finish off the fight with Pain. Sorry you had to see that, kid, he said, rubbing the back of his head and looking sheepish. The fox has chronic PMS issues even when he's a male. The boy didn't say a thing, probably not hearing what Naruto had said. He only stared at him, slack-jawed. He also blinked a few times, as if trying to force his eyes that what they were seeing in front of him was an illusion. Then with a shaky breath, he uttered, "Dad?" Naruto scratched his right cheek. "No, I'm not your dad, kid. But you look so much like him." The boy's hand shifted to his own cheeks. "And we have the same marks on our cheeks. Well, you didn't have them in Mom's pictures of you, but..." He stopped, unsure how to proceed. "What's your name?" Naruto didn't know what else to ask. "Naruto." I said, "What's your name, kid?" Surely the boy must have confused his question or something. No way would his name be Naruto. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto stared. Apart from the whiskered cheeks, the kid didn't look a tad bit like him. And his name happened to be the same as his own? Not only that, they were inside his own mindscape. It would have been so easy and much less complex if Naruto were to believe that this boy with the slightly tamed red hair and the dark gray eyes, complete contrasts to his spiky blonde hair and sky blue eyes, was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. But if he were to think really hard on this situation, he would realize that no other being existed inside this mindscape, apart from the Kyuubi and a piece of his dad's soul, so that preferred escape through ignorance was shot out. Sometimes Naruto wished he didn't wise up. Ignorance is bliss, after all. "If you're not my dad," Chibi Naruto said, "then who are you?" "Look, Naruto, man. Did it feel weird talking to someone who shared the same name? I need to clarify something about you first." "What's clarify?" "To make clear." "Oh, so what was the last thing you remember before waking up in this place?" Chibi Naruto's face scrunched up. Naruto had heard many jokes from his friends that whenever he thought really hard about something, his face would scrunch up the same way this kid was showing. It didn't alleviate his worries, but merely added a lot of coal in the fire. "I was waiting for my mom to get back home. She got called to Hokage Gigi's office. When she left, some white-haired ninja kicked the door of our house and tied me up." He said, Chibi Naruto's voice hitched, that he was going to kill me for killing Tsubaki over and over. He smelled funny, too. Tsubaki. That name ringed a bell, somehow. Even a white-haired ninja that was involved with this Tsubaki. White hair. Tsubaki. Wait, Tsubaki was Mizuki's former lover. Then that means, I don't know where he took me, but just the way the ninja looked at me, it was scary. When we stopped, he started doing something with his hands like this. He started doing the motions for hand seals, but nothing except the tiger seal were correct, and I don't remember. Naruto could already tell what happened even without proof. But the blanks he filled into this kid's story were outside the logic of reality since Mizuki had committed suicide 3 years ago, and Tsubaki was killed in action the year after that. Where the heck was he? The Twilight Zone or something? "I want my mom." Naruto swallowed. None of what was happening made any sense, and this visitor seemed hell-bent in making him even more confused. But throughout the conversation with the boy, he couldn't detect even a single lie. Chibi Naruto was either telling the truth or he was merely a figment of his madness rather than imagination. God knew that Naruto must have snapped at some point during his hellish life. "What's your mother's name?" "Kushina Uzumaki." Yeah, that deity really had it in for him, huh? Naruto really wished he could tell the deity to go copulate itself. Resigning to the unsolvable mysteries inside this mindscape, Naruto extended his hand to the kid, and said, "Well, let's go look for her, Naruto-kun." He suppressed a shudder. "Was talking to yourself. A red-haired and gray-eyed version of yourself that is probably 17 years your junior, still considered madness?" "It should be," Naruto decided. Chibi Naruto looked at his hand warily at first before reaching for it with his own little limb. When their hands touched, both felt a sudden jolt of electricity and magnetic attraction. Naruto was able to let go in time before the two of them collided with each other, but the short seconds of contact left him groggy and adorning a painful headache. He remembered the face of a beautiful redhead smiling down on him. He remembered the soothing lullaby she sang to him as he slowly lulled to sleep. He remembered the questions he asked her about his father and the country she had originally been in. These were alien memories. Memories of a childhood that couldn't possibly have happened to him. Yet he could never mistake the face of the one who gave birth to him. It was Kushina Uzumaki inside those memories. Kushina Uzumaki, his mother. His mother. He had only ever seen her in old pictures, but he could never mistake that angelic face with another. When he came to his senses again and numbed the pain in his head, he tried to make sense of the rest of the memories that were somehow transferred from the kid to him. Naruto couldn't possibly think of any other explanation than that. It hurt too much to think anything else right now. And as he sorted through these interesting viewpoint of a life he could have lived if his mother had survived his birth, Naruto noticed too late that he had been alone in the White Room throughout it. Kushina Uzumaki had gone through plenty of grief during her 28 years of life. Her mother died when she was 5 due to an illness incurable at the time. And if that hadn't been enough, her home, her whole village, had been swept away by a flash flood while her team was out on a C-rank mission. Kushina always had a feeling that a village situated so close to the ocean would bring trouble. She also suspected foul play, that a flash flood large enough to level the whole village had to have been artificial. But there was no trace or evidence that she could acquire, and her suspicions of Chigiri no Sato's Tr. Village of the Bloody Mist involvement remained a speculation. With the Uzu daimyo's decision to disband the ninja system in the land of Whirlpool, Kushina and her team, along with a few other Uzu ninjas who weren't in the village at the time, were left with two options. Leave the life of a shinobi and become civilians, or remain in the path and charge forward. That had always been a quote her father used to tell her, and she wasn't about to break it. Unfortunately, she was the only one in the three-man cell to remain as a shinobi, so she was pretty much on her own. Her sensei did try to persuade her to give this dangerous life up, but she couldn't even think of a life other than being a ninja. When the former Uzu Junin asked her where she would go, to whom she would pledge her services to, she answered one simple word: Konoha. She had been in Konoha before, back when she was only 4. Her mother and her side of the family, the Hasegawa clan, were originally from that ninja village. The Uzumaki family had gone there once for a family reunion, and Kushina had gotten to know a lot of the different cultures in that country, not to mention joining in on the pranking streaks of her cousins. Konoha politics might be weary of her at first, but at least she had a chance to reunite with what was left of her family. Bad news awaited Kushina, though. The Sandaime informed her that the Hasegawa family was one of the many casualties in a kamikaze attack from Iwa during the Second Great Shinobi War, which would not end for another 8 months. But the Hokage did not turn away her willingness to join Konoha. The rest of her life inside Konoha had been rough at first, but they got better through time. She found love in that village and even started her own family. Sadly, her happiness was short-lived when her lover sacrificed his life to save Konoha from the Kyuubi's rampage, ending up with the sealing of the Biju inside their own son. If Tsunade hadn't been there when she delivered, she might have died from postpartum hemorrhaging and left Naruto as an orphan. Bleeding to death was not something Kushina considered a great way for a kunoichi to die, especially when it came from childbirth. She persevered through the days of being bedbound, and at least she had all the time in the world in taking care of her infant son now that Minato was dead. There was not a trace of Minato in him, though. Oftentimes she wished that Naruto had looked more like her father than her mother, but never meant it. Naruto would always be Naruto to her. And now she almost lost him, too. Throughout her son's growth, he had always been weak. Pale as ivory, thin to the brink of appearing like an anorexic, and heavy bags under his eyes. The Kyuubi's chakra inside his system acted like a slow poison, killing the victim in a snail's pace. As for food, from breastfeeding to solid foods, Naruto would rather have little scraps than eat everything in his plate. Give him a bowl of ramen, he'd sip around 5 teaspoonfuls of the broth and only nibble on the noodles. There were a lot of times when she had to force him to eat a lot more than he wanted. She wasn't proud of doing this to her own son, but he was already thin as it was. She was afraid he'd die of starvation. It was a wonder that he had survived for over 5 years. There was also the matter with the villagers to think about. Ever since the Sandaime made it public knowledge to everyone in Konoha, except for the younger generation, that the Kyuubi was sealed inside Minato's illegitimate son. The villagers divided into two factions which Kushina had called the ignorant blamers and the smart people. The latter people were more accepting of Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki, though there were still bits of fear she sensed in their actions and expressions. They tolerated Naruto, as if he were some permanent disease they had to live with, but most of the time they wanted nothing to do with him. The ignorant blamers, however, were a more outspoken group in their hatred towards the disaster that brought many deaths to the village. They used Naruto as a scapegoat in their grief, pinning all the blame on him because he housed the Kyuubi. Many attempted to persuade the Konoha Council to kill him, with little to no success. Few even dared to take matters into their own hands. Out of the 12 attempts at Naruto's life, only one succeeded, partially. Naruto still lived, but Kushina was afraid what this trauma could do to him. Tsunade made it a point not to discuss the extent of Naruto's injuries to her until the Senju medic Nin submitted her full report to the Hokage. It would not help his case if Kushina suddenly went on a rampaging path of vengeance, seeking the horrible man who almost killed her son, without reporting this first to the leader of the village. The evil of politics. When Naruto awoke around lunchtime, he seemed chipper than Kushina would have guessed after surviving such a traumatic event. She called for Tsunade, and the slug princess gave the boy one final checkup to be double sure that he was fit to leave the hospital. "Mom, why am I here?" Naruto asked as Tsunade did her checkup. "What do you remember last night, Naruto-kun?" Tsunade questioned, her chakra-covered hands scanning for any lasting damage on the boy's body. Apart from increased brainwave activity, there were no anomalies to be found. Not even a faint scar on his unblemished skin. His face scrunched up in concentration. "I remember hearing someone kicking the door open and shouting out something." "Anything else?" He shook his head. "I remember the cool dream I had, though." "Does that count?" "No." He probably repressed his memories by his own. Her eyebrows furrowed as she shifted her hands towards Naruto's stomach. Or the Kyuubi had something to do with it. Maybe. It was a really cool dream, though, Naruto continued, his trademark foxy smile adorned. "I was walking to this really huge cage because some voice inside it told me to go there. Then somebody shouted, 'Get away from there,' so suddenly that I was catched by surprise." "Caught, Naruto-chan," Kushina interjected. "It's caught." "Yeah, caught. The shouter probably saved me from getting grated by these really huge claws that appeared from inside the cage." He mimicked the motion, but after a quick retort from Tsunade to stay still, he substituted for smaller movements. "I think it was the Kyuubi inside that cage." The two women looked flabbergasted, but Naruto didn't see it. And Dad was also there. He showed the Kyuubi who was boss, believe it. Tsunade looked at Kushina, who looked back. There was a silent conversation going between them that Naruto didn't even notice as he went on with how his father denied that it was him. But Naruto knew better, and when they were about to touch hands he woke up. Tsunade seemed to think that the fox must have been trying to possess Naruto, but Kushina silently argued that this was not so. She had been here through the whole night, sleeping in the same room as Naruto, and with her honed senses to danger. A trait she'd gotten from her Uzu ninja training. She would have noticed if there was even a small speck of demonic chakra leaking in her son's system. Demonic chakra has that malevolent presence to it, like the feeling of terror and vertigo as you stare at the ground from the sky. "So," Kushina interjected, stopping Naruto from elaborating more about his dream, "what's the verdict?" "He's free to leave the hospital. No use keeping him here when he's 100% healthy." "Are you sure? No lasting damage?" "At first, I thought there would be. But apparently we've underestimated the extent of his healing factor. Nothing is amiss." She then chuckled. "With this kind of trait, I wouldn't be surprised if he regrew bones or even repaired a damaged eye." "I'm cool that way," Naruto said, although he wasn't sure why she was praising his healing. Didn't other people heal the same? "Don't get why, brat." Though she said that, truthfully she was glad her godson wouldn't be suffering any kind of trauma from the experience. He didn't seem to remember what happened to him after he had been kidnapped by the ninja, and his current state was as if he had never been injured at all. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she said to Kushina. The redhead nodded, telling Naruto to stay put, and both women stepped outside the room. "I'll be adding into the medical report of Naruto's repressed memories. If we want justice to be served, I believe it's best if we let a Yamanaka dive into Naruto's psyche." And let my son remember and relive the traumatizing event? I would have to say no, even if it means we have to bag the motherfucker the hard way. Tsunade pursed her lips. It's not my decision, Kushina. But at least hear the Yamanaka clan out if the Hokage suggests you do this. There may be a part of their clan's techniques which keeps Naruto's memories repressed while they rummage around for the image of the culprit. Kushina was silent. She then said, will they guarantee Naruto's mental stability? Years ago, I've had a case similar to this one, and the patient came out fine in that regard. Who was that patient? Classified information. Doctor's oath to secrecy, you understand. Yeah, look, whether you agree to this or not, I'm supporting your decision all the way. Kushina showed her surprise right away. Tsunade Ba-chan, we want what's best for the little guy, and if you believe that it's better to not irritate the bandaged wounds, then I'm all for it. Mother knows best, after all. Kushina chuckled. You're a mother, too, you know. Yet it seems I seem to spend more time with work than with my daughter. Her good-natured chuckle turned to a nervous one. The door to Naruto's hospital room opened and the boy himself peeked out. Mom, I'm kinda hungry. His stomach's growl would attest to that statement. Well, that's new, Kushina thought. Naruto-chan rarely asked for food. Not to mention this is the first time I heard his stomach growl. Tsunade Ba-chan, do you think that this could be a side effect of the healing factor? The older woman was fully aware of Naruto's reaction to the Kyuubi's presence in his system, and like Kushina, was caught by utter surprise at the scene played out before them. Probably. He would need to have some source other than pure chakra to heal all those wounds, and it looks like he must have depleted it. I hope that's the only side effect. Really hope. She then said to Naruto, what do you want for lunch, aka Chan? Naruto groaned. He hated that nickname. How about ramen? Ramen, you say? She grinned. Then how about we head down to Ichiraku after we're done here? Really? All right. Quiet, brat, Tsunade scolded. We're in a hospital. Oh, right. Sorry. He's free to go. Do try to get him something to eat. He'll need it. I sure will, Tsunade Ba-chan. She then hugged the woman. Thanks for everything today. It's the least I could do. Tsunade returned the smile Kushina gave her. Taking Naruto's hand in hers, she said to him, let's get some ramen, Naruto-chan. Back inside the inner chambers of Naruto's mindscape, the blonde-haired, 22-year-old version of Naruto was done skimming through 5 years' worth of memories, and he couldn't help himself in comparing the parallelism and vast difference, as contrary as it sounded, between this world and the world he had left behind, specifically, the world he had no choice but to sacrifice his life for, because he was fated to do so. In a nutshell, the world that fucked him up. Royally. Anyway, the comparisons he found were not quite what he had envisioned for a fresh start. He didn't go to heaven, so something must have gone wrong with the jutsu. The best thing Naruto could think of was that his soul had been transported into an alternate reality where he had been born to look more like his mother than his father. That, and pretty much Konoha as a whole looked entirely different than in his world. For starters, Tsunade Senju never left the village. Apparently his mother had something to do with that, around a few years before he was born. The story leading to Tsunade's intention of leaving Konoha was still pretty much intact, but the point of divergence from what he had always known was when his mother confronted her about her leaving. They argued, which he learned from the Shizune of this world that it had been a common occurrence during those days, and then, like when Naruto and Tsunade first met in the old world, a bet was made. And since Tsunade was also known as the legendary sucker in this world, the winner of the bet was obvious. Tsunade honored the bet's condition that she would stay if she lost, and subsequently she ended up starting a family in Konoha and had a daughter named Chiome, who was around 3 years older than him. After that, Kushina and Tsunade became quite close friends. He figured this all out from Chiome herself when his red-headed self asked her about why their mothers were very close. She didn't get the full details of the story. If she did, he would have known what the bet was, because he was damn curious about it, but the gist of it was enough to sedate his curiosity. A little for him, anyway. His red-headed counterpart believed that Chiome's story was the full picture, so his curiosity was fully sedated. The second difference was the layout of the village. The basic foundation of the area was the same, but the structures, the houses, the towers, Ichiraku Ramen, among others, were no longer where they were, as if he was entering a Konoha that had its buildings' locations scrambled and swapped. For example, The Hokage monument in the original reality was situated in the center of the village. In this one, the monument is located at the northeastern side of the village, attached to the corner boundaries, and is curved inward rather than outward, forming a C-shaped 20-story wall around the Hokage Tower built in the very middle. Basically, this was a reality 17 years behind his own, yet any kind of foreknowledge he had was next to useless since none of it would connect well to what had already occurred in this reality. His foreknowledge in the general may be of some help, but not much. It might sound fun predicting what was about to come correctly, but most of what he could remember were the bad things, since the previous world was adamant in its mission in supplying Naruto with enough grief to drown the ocean. This time, he cursed fate to go copulate itself out loud. Well, as far as he knew, he would have to get comfortable for now. The mindscape he had conjured up by the snap of a finger was impressive, but the white emptiness was starting to scare him. What with the echoes? Go copulate yourself. Belate yourself. Late yourself. 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 An endless no colors theme. It was as if he had stepped into a padded room for the insane. If that was so, then it was a fitting place, although that didn't mean he liked it. Well, what worked once should work again, he thought cheerfully as he once more snapped his fingers with the thought of what to conjure. The entire area morphed into Naruto's old apartment, complete with empty ramen cups he never gave time to pick off the floor and throw into the garbage bin. Ever since the Akatsuki started a more offensive course of action in the war, Naruto barely had time to relax, much less clean after himself. The most downtime he had before the Hokage gave him another mission was one night, which he slept through. He lay down on the bed, arms crossing behind his head, and yawned. Blowing out air through his mouth like a horse's mouth snort, he stared at the gray ceiling. Everything was in perfect detail, all the way down to the wavy cracks that looked like cartoon sea waves, the brown spots where the paint had been chipped off, and the dark stains where rainwater leaked through the tiny crevices. Naruto picked his apartment as his mindscape scenery because it was familiar and a place he knew he'd be in his element, even if it was just an imagined place based on the real one. But this was the first time that he concentrated on the little details so as not to think of any other thought. But try as he could, he was still Naruto Uzumaki, and Naruto Uzumaki was known to have a short attention span outside training and ninja-related activities. Stray thoughts concerning his current predicament always burst into the forefront no matter how many times he distracted himself. Other than observing the bland, rain-stained ceiling, he went to the kitchen and started counting his kitchen utensils, drinking containers, and food products, like a man with OCD on counting. The stray thoughts breached his defenses. He tried closing his eyes and counted sheep. He got to 59 when the stray thoughts attacked again. And he promised to never count sheep again because he found 59 of the fluffy white Baa-ing creatures inside his bedroom, which expanded in size to accommodate them. This is getting ridiculous, he uttered while banishing each and every one of the sheep. All except for one, though. He figured he kept one so as to remind himself that inside this mindscape, he was like a god who could create and destroy at the speed of thought. Well, the sheep needed a name now. His first idea for the sheep's name was Ba-chan, an easy thing to remember since that's the sheep's sole vocabulary. But he didn't want to confuse Ba-chan the sheep with Ba-chan the old maid, at least in his original world. He gestured for the sheep to come closer, and surprisingly the sheep complied. Got a name? Naruto asked it. You're seriously asking me that? Not the least freaked out that a sheep was talking, Naruto answered. Then what should I call you, mutton meat? If sheep were capable of showing human facial expressions, it would have looked at Naruto as if he were crazy. Considering he was talking to a sheep. Well, if you don't like that name, do you have any preference? The sheep tilted its head to the left, which Naruto mirrored. You do realize that you're talking to a sheep, right? Yeah, your point? You're not freaked out about this, at all? Again, the sheep looked at Naruto as if it thought he had too many bats in his belfry. I've seen talking animals before. A talking sheep is nothing new to me. Were they imaginary? No, they were actual animals. And you still doubt you're crazy? Yeah, the sheep shook its head. Better I didn't ask, then. Whatever. Look, sheepy, I'm mentally exhausted right now, so I want you to stay quiet while I get some shut-eye. The newly christened sheepy looked like it was embarrassed of its given name. My name is not Sheepy. Naruto took off his ninja sandals and jacket, and lay down on his bed, squirming for a good spot to rest. Why not? It's very sheepish. Not funny, it deadpanned. He grinned. Then I'll think of a name later. I need sleep. But what am I supposed to do while you're sleeping? Naruto closed his eyes and prepared for a well-needed 12-hour slumber. I don't know, play solitaire? I'm a sheep, human. Hooves and no opposable thumbs, remember? Look, I don't know. Now shut up. I need sleep. But, I need sleep. Then, I need sleep. Enough was enough, so Naruto took a page from Iruka-sensei's book and used the infamous big head technique. I need sleep. After a long moment of silence, the sheep said, yes sir. Good night, sir. It then left the bedroom. Naruto lay his head back down on the soft, fluffy pillow. He took a deep breath. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The exhaustion trailed after his body and sleep came for him in no time flat. Naruto Uzumaki was any normal 5-year-old kid with the thirst for attention. He wasn't completely normal, though. Despite having one of the fiercest tailed beasts that was known to represent human hatred and malice sealed inside him, he was unaware of this fact. There was something else about him that differentiated him from normalcy. He functioned normally and made a few acquaintances even with his weak constitution and slightly introverted personality, and had enough life in him to live through at least his young adult years. But something universal had happened to him inside that operating room when he was close to succumbing to death after the fatal number Mizuki had done to him. In a nutshell, he was saved from death because of a fluke. His blonde counterpart, now resting peacefully inside the kid's inner mindscape along with the bored talking sheep, had come to him moments after his heart stopped beating. Neither knew anything about this, but the older Naruto would most likely piece together a close to the truth theory on what the Rikudo Sennin's suicide jutsu actually does to the user. But their worlds were not the only ones in existence. A macroverse exists beyond what their minds can comprehend, places in the void which bridges these infinite number of worlds to create a giant web of intertwined universes. Each and every one tells of a story that can be different and the same without being contradictory. It is the way of the macroverse, and so it is willed. What the blonde Naruto failed to realize when he studied and mastered the suicide jutsu was that the Rikudo Sennin never used it. It never occurred to him that maybe it was coined a suicide jutsu because the user would die in their universe, in some sense of the word, but happened to wake up in an all-new different one. If the Rikudo Sennin had done this, he might have transported his whole body to a new universe, but since it was Naruto, who housed only the Kyuubi rather than the Jubi, the process was incomplete. The consequence of such a half-assed action, regardless if he had no idea what it would do, led Naruto to a more troublesome predicament. His body didn't come with him. And since his soul needed a body to anchor him into the new universe he traversed into, the first place it looked for was Naruto's counterpart. And the rest was history, you could say. The red-headed Naruto had no idea that the dream he had before waking up in the hospital was his first ever trip into his mindscape. There were a few times where he dreamed of the Kyuubi and its enchanting voice directing him towards those huge gates with the paper pasted in the middle, although never reaching that close before. But they were soon forgotten once he had come out of the fog of sleep, along with the other nightmares his subconscious deemed too terrifying to be remembered, like a world with no ramen. In the meantime, he was enjoying a bowl of the only meal he'd want to finish, broth included, if he could. It was like his stomach didn't want to digest more than what Naruto needed to barely survive without dying of starvation. He didn't get enough nutrients these past years to fill up his frame, and he was around 3 or 4 inches shorter than the rest of his age mates. His maternal grandmother, God bless her soul, would have cried out, "Oh my, grandson. You're so thin, nothing but skin and bones," if she had seen him now. And today was turning out to be the oddest day of his life. He had just gotten through half of his own bowl of tonkatsu ramen, which is quite a heavy order, according to Tuchi Uji-san, and he was craving for more. The savory taste of the deep-fried pork mixing together with the noodle and broth was so much like heaven that Naruto almost believed that he was already there. His mother eyed him in the same watchful manner whenever they ate out in Ichiraku, but there was something in her gaze that seemed, to him, more intense than just watching over the amount he ate. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, after eating the last bit of tonkatsu in his order. "Hey?" Her gray eyes lost their intensity and reverted to how he always saw them. She cleared her throat. "No, nothing at all. I'm just Amazed how much you're eating today. Naruto shrugged. I'm just really hungry. But never like this before. He made a non-committal reply and wolfed down the broth and noodles. With the bowl empty and his stomach full, partially, anyway, but he was too shy to ask for another serving, he breathed in deeply, clasped his hands together, and thanked for the meal. After paying, the mother and son went on their way home. They were just passing by the shopping district when Naruto spotted someone familiar staring at a shop's window. The man looked to be thinking deeply, not minding the woman, who was tapping her foot while staring at the sky, standing next to him. Curious, Naruto tugged his mother's hand. Yes, Naruto-chan, can we go to that shop? He asked, pointing at said shop. His mother took one look at where he pointed and immediately blanched. Why do you want to go there? I think I saw Kakashi ni-chan there. From blanching to menacing, though it was not directed to the boy holding her hand, Kushina looked back at the small shop noticeable only by the large slogan sign attached to its roof. Erotica Cafe. I see. Is ni-chan in trouble again? Kushina considered it, but shook her head in the end. He's an adult now, Naruto-chan, therefore he's free to make his own decisions. Will I be like that when I grow up? Gah. She knelt down, grabbed both of his shoulders, and tamed him with a hardened stare. You will not grow up like Kakashi. Am I clear, Naruto? Yes, Mom, he said. You're scaring me. Sorry about that. She stood back up, but it's for your own good. With male role models like Kakashi and Jiraiya-sama, I have a right to be worried about your upbringing. Just promise me you won't grow up like either of them. I don't really get it, but okay, Mom, I promise. He smiled at her, to which she smiled back. They then continued their trek back home. And as they passed the shop, Naruto took a glimpse at the woman beside Kakashi. She was small, barely reaching Kakashi's ear level, and her black hair seemed to glisten in the sun like an onyx jewel. The afternoon crowd didn't give Naruto a good view of the two except for their heads, which he could tell right away which was Kakashi. Just follow the silver, gravity-defying hair. Naruto wanted to go and at least greet Kakashi today, but his mother didn't seem to like going near the shop Kakashi was checking out. With unanswered questions inside a 5-year-old boy's head, a boy who had the most curious mind in his age group, he turned to his mother for the asking part. Something only adults are allowed to know, was her crisp answer, clearly uncomfortable of being asked such a question. Naruto, although young and inexperienced about a lot of things, understood when his mother didn't want to elaborate over a certain topic. It was like a subtle signal she often projected unconsciously whenever conversations turned to what he dubbed the adult stuff. As such, he didn't press for any more, even when he was still wondering why Kakashi was in front of that shop. He just asked the Junin later, away from Mom's hearing. But what Naruto did not expect was for his mother to come to Kakashi first before he could ask him anything. The woman might have retired from active duty as a ninja, but she was still known as the most badass kunoichi in Konoha. Sadly, the nature of what Kushina did to Kakashi behind closed doors shall forever remain a great, big mystery. One thing was for sure, though, when Naruto finally got the chance to ask the white-haired ninja about that without having his mother's acute ears listening in, his response was, something only adults are allowed to know. Naruto groaned. Mutton? No. Lamb? No. Lamb chops? No. Mighty meaty mutton? No. We'll make it 3M for short, then. Still no. Sheepy? For the last goddamn time, no. And you've suggested that name 19 times already. Really? Really? Naruto smiled. Glad you agree. Your new name is, really. What? No, I didn't mean it that way. Now that that's out of the way, I'm still not satisfied with my new name. Naruto sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We've been at this for 8 hours now. 10 minutes, actually. And I know that you're eager to have your own sense of identity. I want to name myself, for a change. But rushing this time-consuming task will only lead to a name you will not respect, along with the people. What people? We're in a freaking mindscape. Who should be treated with respect, he finished. The sheep snorted, an odd sound, coming from its mouth. Wait, you're referring to yourself about the people and respect thing? He nodded. The sheep laughed. At least Naruto thought so. His laugh sounded too much like, baha 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 baha. I'm happy you find this amusing, Naruto said with a roll of his eyes. Really? The newly christened really, whose previous official names happened to be Sheepy, Ramstein, Dewey, and Lambie, stopped his absurd laughter. Quote. I think I like Ramstein better. Really? You know my new name is going to get confusing. I mean, how do I know you're calling me instead of just asking someone, really? Huh, never thought of that, but you gotta admit, it has this double meaning cut down for it. Hello, I'm really a sheep. Really stared at him. Dude, you so suck at pun jokes. Naruto chuckled and puffed out his chest. I'm glad you think so. Is that something to be proud of at all? Anyway, let's move on to more pressing matters. Really sighed. Okay, but we will get back to my name. How's the kid doing while I was asleep? Better than when you're awake. I hope you mean we're awake. I don't like the implication in that sentence. Yeah, he got released from the hospital and everything. What are you planning on doing? When he goes to sleep, I'll go and have a talk with him. You know, settle the predicament I've gotten myself into. And what about me? You. He paused, pondering what to say. You just stand in a corner and act natural. Oh, by eating grass or your carpet? The sheep asked sarcastically. It seemed to be doing a better job at jokes because Naruto ended up laughing out loud. You see, Naruto, after waking from his nap, had decided to redecorate his whole apartment since he was sure there was no way back for him to his old world. Better to make the most out of the situation, and he had adapted to it in hours when even the most adaptable person would rather first grasp the fact that he died and was now living inside the mindscape of a 5-year-old, red-haired version of himself. Which would take days, before thinking about interior designing. Naruto was already considered a man that was off his rockers when he believed that Bahalana, the ramen god, actually exists, going so far as to proclaim himself as the first blonde prophet. He didn't start any kind of new religion, though, further believing that Bahalana could do that himself. All what Naruto had to offer was his faith and a wide consumption of the heavenly, but unhealthy, noodles. Interestingly enough, he was able to convince Ayame and Tucci about it, and they were then christened as the second and third disciples of Bahalana. The others just steered clear of them whenever Naruto started his 5-minute sermons in between servings of ramen bowls. But his religion was beyond the point. What really irked was whatever that was left of Naruto's sanity was not enough to make him rethink the oddities he had added to the apartment. It was quite annoying, not only because he reimagined the white walls to become a lighter orange, the cupboards in the kitchen be filled with nothing but instant ramen cups, and created 2 adjacent rooms where one led to a small library and the other was nothing more than a secret room. A lair. I mean, base of operations. Can't be complete without a secret room, was Naruto's explanation, but because he covered the whole apartment floor in a green-colored carpet that had a distinct illusion of looking so much like grass. Just the mere sight of it made really hungry, and really once tried to eat it and ended up with a case of indigestion. Really made a mess, but with a simple banishment thought from Naruto, the trash was disposed of. Including Really's dignity, though it was already gone before the trash banishment. That was the first time I've ever seen a sheep barf out grass, Naruto said after controlling the urge to laugh a few minutes more. And shit it at the same time. Stating the obvious out loud was probably a bad idea, because Naruto lost control and continued the tirade of humor-filled HAHAs while really just stood there, forced to wait for Naruto to regain control. I haven't laughed that hard in a long while. Are you done yet? Really didn't understand the humor. Vomiting and shitting at the same time should be regarded as something disgusting, right? Now, he replied, grinning as if there were still some laughter left in him. He moved towards the other side of the room, where his bed, now sporting the softest mattress he had ever imagined, was. He leapt, landed on the side of the mattress, and bounced a few times. The softness was almost unreal, as if he were floating on air. How I love the limitless possibilities in mindscapes. While you're in that top-of-the-world train of thought, how about making a few U's for companionship? Don't want to get distracted. Many things to do, many things to do. Crud, really murmured. It was hoping for some in heat mating. It hadn't tasted a fine specimen of female sheep since it was conjured inside this mindscape. And the soul you in the 59 sheep the human had conjured hours ago was long gone. What things are you talking about anyway? Really asked. Naruto shrugged. Nothing specific, for the moment, except for one. It'd be undoubtedly boring if I don't get involved in my counterpart's life and help him to survive. That last attempt on his life was a very close call. I don't want that to happen again. What do you have in mind? The purpose of the older generation is to pass down their knowledge to the next one, Naruto said sagely, although in truth he heard that from the Sandaime in one of the many speeches he had been forced to listen to back during his academy and early genin days. That one quote stood out among the others because Naruto found it to be the most ironic thing he had ever heard. He believed that he was exempted from that saying, which often disheartened him. But in this case, he wasn't about to do to others what bad things others had done to him. It wasn't in Naruto's nature. All of your knowledge? Really asked, which seemed to have a slight inclusion of wariness, as if it believed that the blonde would do more harm than good to the boy's development. Naruto, not backing down, glared defiantly at the sheep. Yeah, what of it? And do you have a specific training schedule in mind? It was almost afraid to ask that. He tried to retort, but he closed his mouth with an audible click made by his clashing teeth. The truth of the matter was that he hadn't thought about the training regimen yet. He would need to ponder over this quickly. Guess not, the sheep murmured, turning away from him. It seemed to have found something else to bide its time because really started staring out the window. The kid's asleep and dreaming, you sure? The sheep didn't reply, just gestured its head towards the window. Naruto got off the bed, went where Riley was, and validated Riley's claim with his own eyes. He had stared out this window a few times back in his old world, and he already had a distinct picture of what he expected to see despite knowing his current situation. This was a con in his attempt to create a place of solitude for him to think. Sometimes he began to brush off the harsh grip of reality and see what he only wanted to see. This time, however, the subconscious phenomenon did not disillusion the image beyond the window. What Naruto was looking at was the dream his counterpart was currently dreaming. It pictured the ninja academy and chibi Naruto was sitting inside a classroom, a redhead blending in with the distorted faces of generic classmates, and listening to the teacher as he discussed the ways on how to be a cool ninja. Ah, typical childhood dreams. Naruto often had these back before and during his academy days, back when he was naive enough to believe the villagers' tales of honor and glory of becoming a ninja. He didn't regret becoming one, but did regret that he came to this career out of blind assumptions. There was no honor in stabbing a person in the back because it was the easiest method of assassination. There was no honor in lying, cheating, and stealing to fulfill the objectives given to you. And there was no honor in gloating over a kill you had done. It made you look like a merciless killer, no feeling of remorse or respect to the dead as you glorified your own accomplishments. Regardless if it was an enemy ninja you had killed, who's to say that the two rivaling villages would stay enemies forever? What was once your greatest enemy might, in the future, become your most valuable ally. What value would your precious kill be, then? The only honor and glory Naruto had come across in his gritty job was being patriotic to his village and country, protecting it from invaders and conspirers who wished to see its demise. This Naruto was still wet behind the ears, ignorant of what dirty road lay ahead once he received his Hite 8. Ninjas don't learn ninjutsu to beat opponents while looking cool in the process. They learn ninjutsu to eradicate their opponents, when conventional means become too difficult or too time-consuming. Looking cool is just coincidental. Kids, mostly boys, have this unconscious gratification of violence, not because they are violent in nature, but because they take the initiative to reach the top of the social standings. By being part of the top, you're already considered cool. It's a part of human nature, and Naruto had to wrestle around, try to survive at the bottom during his childhood. Dominion is a powerful tool when handled wisely, but for kids in Chibi Naruto's age group, dominion over others does not come from wise words or political maneuvering, aka slithering through the ranks, but by sheer force. Violence is not the key, it's the plan of action and general opinion of the population. In this case, what traits the kids believe to be cool? The concept of death, the concept of actually killing another human being, does not cross their minds. They look at the light, but never the dark. Eventually they will, but not at this age. Standing behind that window, looking out at the child he must have once been like before reality finally settled into his heart and soul, he couldn't help but envy his counterpart. The kid could play ignorant for a few more years while Naruto had to keep the hard truth of life next to his heart, lest it got out of control and became the seed of wanton madness. God knew how many ninja who couldn't take the pressure of the shinobi way, how they were like deep-sea fish trying to rise towards the surface, to get away from the choking feeling of everything squeezing them with every last sweat and tear left in their battered bodies, only to reach a certain point and explode due to their bodies unaccustomed to the depressurization. A ninja lives a tough life. It'll forever be a part of you even when you turn away from duty. Will you be talking to him? Really asked. Naruto considered it a bit, but ultimately shook his head. It's too soon, I guess. I still need to plan this out. Ignorant to the guests inside his mindscape, Chibi Naruto dreamed on. Hiruzen Sarutobi closed the folder with a heavy sigh. Reading the report on Naruto's near-death experience seemed to have aged him at least 5 years. He was 61 years old and felt 20 years older than that. 5 years ago, he had been preparing for a long-term vacation from the hectic duties his position had done to him over the last year of his tenure before he passed on the torch to Minato Namikaze. It didn't come to fruition for another 3 years, but Hiruzen often indulged in delayed gratification, so he didn't mind the wait. It would have been much more fun if his wife could accompany him, but, pondering over it in hindsight, maybe it was better that she was no longer amongst the living because Hiruzen was certain she would have raised a good portion of Konoha when he cancelled the appointment. With the Kyuubi's attack, the sacrifice of his successor, and Hiruzen's subsequent reinstatement of the title he had retired from 3 years previous, Konoha had gone into disarray that a planned vacation became as important as a dirty box in the attic. His village needed his guidance once more when the bright fire of the famed Yondaime had been put out long before his time. It pained Hiruzen's heart to bury the younger generation when it should be the other way around. He did what he could to reclaim order into the chaos brought on by the Kyuubi's attack, which left behind scorched buildings, ruined businesses, and over 100 homeless people, 6 of which were now orphans. Still, Konoha, even with all its fame in the history books as a very successful country brimmed with nobles and riches, could not accommodate all its resources to helping these now homeless people out. Apart from supplying a roof over their heads in the unused evacuation shelters and a rationed amount of food, they had to start fending for themselves to acquire other things. The evacuation shelters were not a part of charity, but mostly considered temporary homes until the homeless people set their priorities straight and get back into the game. It was a little heartless, but Hiruzen had to think of the village as a whole, and with tensions still arising between Konoha, Kiri, and Iwa, he had to build, or rather rebuild, a sturdy defense. The Kyuubi did more than just destroy homes, it nearly eradicated Konoha's ninja forces. Despite his heart screaming to help each and every one of his people, even pitching in his own money to help with their supplies of basic necessities, his hands were tied. The lives of the majority of the village far outweigh the lives of but a few homeless villagers. Maybe this incident had been the start of the village's hatred. To realize that all that you had, your home, your career, your loved ones, your life, was clawed away from you in one horrible night. It would be a miracle not to exact hate onto the very thing that had caused this tragedy, even if it was by proxy. Hiruzen held faith in the village that they would see Naruto Uzumaki as who he was, a hero, one that was born from another hero's sacrifice. But somewhere deep inside him, he knew that it was only wishful thinking. The reception when he told the masses of the Kyuubi's fate and Naruto's heritage was mixed, which he actually expected, so it didn't come as much of a shock. He was a realist, not an optimist. He dreaded to think if the villagers rallied all together and brought out all their hate, shouting for the innocent boy's death. None of that happened, thank God, but animosity was probably the next best thing these haters could do other than death threats. It was wise to make that new law where nobody was to tell any younger generation about the true story of the Kyuubi attack. Not even the other hidden villages knew the full extent, only that the Yondaime died and the Kyuubi disappeared. No mention of Minato having an heir. It would have been a very hard life for Naruto if Kushina hadn't survived his birth. Tsunade had disclosed to him that she had been close, but the world-renowned medic Nin was there to pull her through. Kushina was a headstrong woman and did not take charity whenever it came knocking on her door. He had offered to help her financially when she was barely making enough money to stay above water, but she would have none of it. Hiruzen surmised that she must have grown that way and believed charity to be a form of people showing pity. Though she was headstrong, she did not turn away help when she really needed it. There were times when Kushina had no choice but to leave Naruto for a few days. Her maternity leave days were already used up, the bills were piling up, and the emergency money she and Minato placed in the bank was now depleted, so she had no choice but to accept an A-rank mission. And she entrusted her son's care to probably the most ill-prepared individual for a babysitting job, Kakashi Hitaki. A man of 15 at the time, he had his fair share of D-rank missions where a genin team had to babysit, but this would be the first time Kakashi had to take care of an 8-month-old baby on his own. Minato's reports were accurate, all right. The boys let Rin do all the work in those particular missions. Kakashi had not been thrilled with the job, but he had understood Kushina's tough position and wished for a female comrade to help with the babysitting. While Kushina had begun becoming distrustful to some ninjas, mostly because of paranoia with a slight mix of overprotectiveness, she had agreed to Kakashi's choice. It wasn't Rin, but that female Chunin had the full D-rank experience, meaning she did every variety of D ranks during her genin days. And for some reason, Hiruzen believed that Kushina also saw the budding puppy love between the two. Their age gap was only 1 year and they were both teens, still naive to adult recreation, so maybe this was Kushina's way of pushing Kakashi to get laid. Good God, he needs it. She might have shouted if Hiruzen had asked her this. Or maybe not. He began confusing her personality with the bolder character of that hot-headed tsundere character in one of Jiraiya's Icha Icha short story collections. They seemed so much alike that Hiruzen didn't put it past Jiraiya to model that character with Kushina's old self. Well, putting these meager thoughts aside, Hiruzen gazed his tired eyes at Tsunade's report again. There were no suggestions of any kind about Naruto needing a mind healer. While mind healers often dealt with severe cases of psychological trauma, rape, excess torture sessions, shell shock, horrible battle flashbacks, Naruto might need more than just that. This was the first time an assassination attempt on the boy had almost succeeded. The culprit had to be found and brought to justice, and the easiest way to do so would be to find a memory where that bastard's face was visible. Hiruzen wrote in his memo, Inoichi, Naruto, Kushina's consent. A sigh left his mouth. Many things to do, many things to do. And he still had a whole pile of paperwork needed to be done by the end of the day. Sometimes he wished he let Jiraiya or Tsunade take the mantle rather than him. He had retired from all this pencil pushing for a reason. You know what I heard? I heard that the demon almost died last night. Almost died? Yeah, well, actually his heart stopped for a full minute, then started beating again. And how do you know this? My girlfriend was on duty that night. She told me that the kid actually came back from the dead, as if it were an intervention from God himself. More like the devil, man. I hate thinking that he's immortal. That's just unnatural, huh? He grunted and drank the rest of his ale. Mizuki sat on the far side of the bar, eavesdropping on the gossips and whispers of drunkards. Some of their speech were slurry and hard to discern, but he always came here when he was in need of a place to clear his head and listen to old folktales and ninja adventures. It was all he could do these days. He had been suspended from the academy after one of his disciplinary lessons went a little too far. 2 more weeks and he'd be back, and he'd be sure that the snot-nosed brat had his mouth sealed shut. No one messes with him. No one. The fact remained that he had a lot of free time and extra money in his hand. He couldn't very well spend it all on drinks and hookers, but he hadn't been the same ever since the death of his only girlfriend, Tsubaki. They had been 15, young, and very much in love. Mizuki had first thought that it'd be just a fling, but Tsubaki turned it more than that. Before he knew it, he couldn't stop thinking about her, and he was sure that this predicament also went the other way. His love for her was probably his saving light from the path of darkness he had been about to take. It was because of Tsubaki that he refused Orochimaru's offer to get stronger, not believing his talks of seeing the potential to do great things in him. His preaches just irked Mizuki the wrong way. But his refusal, whether it was for Tsubaki or not, had been a good call, because Orochimaru defected no less than 3 years later, 2 months before the Kyuubi attack. The Kyuubi. After the funeral for the ones who died on that fateful night, Mizuki began his plot to do vengeance. He didn't care if the boy was merely the vessel and also the sole heir of the Yondaime Hokage. He wished justice for his lover's unneeded death, and by the gods he'd do everything in his power to fulfill it. But he didn't take this as blunt as the other haters in the village. No, he wanted to do this alone. It was vengeance he sought, vengeance for the woman he loved and the future they could have had together, not vengeance for the others who died that night. This was personal, and he wished to do this personally. He waited, bided his time for the exact moment where killing the boy was as easy as counting to 10. Others had come for the boy's head, and he made sure that these attempts were foiled before the boy or even his mother realized it. The Sandaime might have discovered his actions, but it was unlikely. Mizuki didn't care either way, though. If the old geezer did find out, then there would be less suspicion on him when it was his turn. If the old geezer did not, then Mizuki would remain as a neutral party, neither hostile nor friendly. A perfect scenario for a dagger in the crowd. Mizuki had been careful, too. His constant observance of the demon boy and his mother's abode sparked the attention of a few Anbu who had been assigned week-long protection missions in intervals, but it was a good thing that they were willing to stop and learn his motives first than going all arrest first questions later mode. He took this as a chance, so when the next bold wannabe assassin came knocking on the Uzumaki household's door, literally, in fact, Mizuki acted faster than the Anbu duo stationed that day. He made quick work of the culprit, apprehended him while stating he broke the law of civilians requiring special permits to have ninja equipment in their possession, in this case, explosive tags, a poisoned dagger, and smoke bombs, and did the subsequent textbook protocol when taking a criminal to jail. The Anbu gave him some leeway after that. Not enough to display full trust. Mizuki doubted that they'd trust anyone other than the Hokage and each other, but it made it easier for him to study their work hours and shifts. Nobody kills the demon boy other than him. Nobody. He had been planning the kidnapping for almost a year. His intellect may not be as up to par as the Nara strategists, but if someone gave him at least 6 months to think of a foolproof plan, then expect the plan coming together nicely. Mizuki made sure to take in every angle, every possibility, every wrong thing that could happen as the plan progressed, and eliminate every fault he could find. And it all worked flawlessly. He rushed into the forest, wanting to kill the boy without alerting people from his screams. He wanted to show no mercy to the demon as it had done to Tsubaki and the village. The boy's screams were deaf to his ears. All he heard was the agony of the demon, the sound that he reveled in. He punched and kicked and stabbed and slashed and burned the demon until it looked nothing more than a lump of bloody, charred meat on the grassy ground. A spot of moonlight penetrating the forest canopy brightened his prone form. Mizuki paused at the sight of blood glistening in the moonlight and the sounds of the boy's labored breaths and agonized moans clashing with Mizuki's own heightened breathing. It all looked and felt surreal, hypnotic. He felt surreal, hypnotized by the adrenaline pumping in his veins and the bloodlust and hatred for the Kyuubi blinding his morals. He was ready to end it. He came closer to the boy's broken form. The pain he must be going through had to be excruciating. With a kunai in his right hand, he would slit the boy's throat and leave the body for someone else to find. He had sought his justice. Nothing more could come from disturbing a corpse. But what came as a shock was the red-orange claw slashing at his Chunin vest. His back slammed against a tree to his right, and while he tried to regain his bearings, a growl caught his full attention. There, standing, breathing and bleeding heavily, was the demon encroached inside a red chakra cloak. It was trying to walk towards him. Fear circulated Mizuki's body. He didn't expect the demon boy to fight back after all the precautions he had made to prevent this. His kunai were laced with a poison that clots the chakra pathways, acting like a more violent and painful version of the gentle fist strikes. But that demon boy was slowly counteracting the poison. The Kyuubi was supposed to be a being made out of pure chakra. For it to do this, Mizuki grinned. He didn't need to deal the finishing blow, after all. The Kyuubi might as well do what he intended to, because if it were to keep on forcing the poison out with its demonic chakra that he knew to be deadly for the boy's fragile body, then it'd be the end of them both. Stupid demon, he murmured before escaping through the trees. It was much better to know that the demon boy would die alone, just as Tsubaki did. It was all for her, after all. All for her. Thankfully, only his Chunin vest was damaged from that attack earlier. If Mizuki had been a little closer, then his chest would be needing stitches along with questions from the hospital staff on how he had gotten them. But still, the vest was tainted with the Kyuubi's demonic chakra and it was only right that it be burned immediately. Mizuki didn't mind. He had 2 more vests in his closet, anyway. Come morning after the event, he was pretty much in high spirits. With the suspension still in place, he had a lot of time to wander along Konoha for the rest of the day. Maybe spend some cash on a luxurious lunch and shoot some drinks at the local pub later on. He was quite content, and for the first time in many years Mizuki felt light, as if gravity had lessened by half. It didn't last, however. News of the Kyuubi Jinchurikis coming back from the dead spread like wildfire, and the weight that had disappeared from his shoulders hours prior returned with its own bit of vengeance. Iruka was the one who told him the rumor, and Mizuki could trust Iruka for truthful information, although he wished it was anything but. So here he was now, getting pissed drunk in his misery as the tavern folk kept spouting on and on about the demon boy and how he should be feared. It was getting into Mizuki's nerves. "Just wait," he whispered, inaudible to all the loud talk coming from behind him. The bartender glanced at him once, and then returned to mixing a tale for the customer at the other end of the bar. "Just wait, Kyuubi. You'll get what's yours soon enough. And this time, I'll make sure your body's nothing but ashes." He ordered for another bottle and quaffed it. The alcohol was burning his throat, but he didn't care. He'd do anything to feel light once more now that he had a taste of it. He needed to kill the Kyuubi Jinchuriki sooner. They'd surely figure out it was him, and he wanted to have his end without this constant weight hovering down on him. The demon boy must die. No more waiting around, no more slithering in the shadows like a predator stalking its prey, no more ninja assassin bullshit. The cloak and dagger plan was botched. It was time to do the alternative. It was suicidal, but better than waiting for Anbu to come knocking at his door. Kakashi was in the park, sitting on a bench and reading his new smut book out in the open, though it was layered in a mild genjutsu so that if anybody were to look, especially the young children running about inside the park's crowded playground, they'd see a cover of Babysitting for Dummies. He had been tasked with the job of watching over Naruto, again, while Kushina discussed something with the Sandaime Hokage. He heard a few rumors flying around this morning about Naruto's dance with death. They varied, as rumors tend to become as they transfer from one loose mouth to another, but the gist of it all still stood. Naruto died and then came back to life. While he was unwilling to believe them until he went to the only verifier of the truth, Kushina, he still smiled when one of the more hyperbole to the point of absurdity version of the Naruto rumor talked about the devil not wanting the annoying child in hell and so brought him back to life. Despite its morbidity, he had to hand it to the villagers' vast imagination. That concept could become a good story with a really disturbing slogan. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Folding the page as a makeshift bookmark, he closed the book and rested his one eye for a while. He checked Naruto, who was playing all by himself at the edge of the playground under a birch tree, and wondered if there really weren't any other side effects brought on by his near death. He was no psychologist, but repressed memories often have a way of coming back to bite you later in life. And those bites would leave more than just mental scars. They could change a man completely, but Naruto still looked to be as blissful as he used to be. His idea of playing in the park is relaxing on the side of a tree trunk, where the sun doesn't glare as profound as when you're in the actual playground, and reading a good book. Naruto didn't look a bit like his father, but he sure acted like him. Minato would often have a book in his pack. That was where Kakashi got his reading habit, and would fish it out when he had spare time in his hand. The more Kakashi looked at the boy, the more he saw Minato that was more than skin deep in him. He couldn't help but smile under his mask. "Good afternoon, Kakashi-san." Kakashi turned to his left and saw Shizune sitting beside him. She was in her usual Junin garb, where her sleeves were longer than her arms. She rarely went out wearing it, preferring her modest casual wear. The only times she'd worn her uniform were when she was about to go on a long-term mission outside the village. And with the pack strapped on her back, she very well must be. "Afternoon," he greeted back. Not wanting Shizune to suspect him of reading smut in the open again, he hid his book in his back pouch. "Fancy meeting you here. I got some time to kill before I meet my team at the southern gates," she said, rolling her sleeves to her elbows. "I got stuck with guarding duty at the Kuro Quarry. The Kuro Quarry is located near the south-southwestern border of the country, dangerously close to reported bandit outposts. There had been times when the fire archaeologists were forced to evacuate the dig site due to increased bandit attacks and raids. Even with the number of ninjas sent to guard them and the quarry, the ninjas lacked the needed manpower to watch the whole perimeter. The quarry had grown deeper and wider over the years of relentless excavation. Funding was supplied by the Fire Lord's deep pockets. To hire a skilled Junin like Shizune on a routine guarding mission inside that giant crater, Kakashi's curiosity reached the breaking point. "How many of you?" he asked. It wouldn't hurt to turn his attention away from Naruto for a few minutes. He wasn't likely to get into trouble so soon anyway. 5 of us. All seasoned Junin, too. Her eyes hardened. This is only B rank, yet it's like we're gearing up for S rank. There've been rumors of ancient ruins in the Kuro quarry these past few years. I wouldn't be surprised if this was covered up as B rank when it is S rank. Best to keep your guard up, all the same. Artifacts from a very old civilization were popping up left and right from discovered ruins all around the continent. Their values were quite high on the market. The most valued ones costing up to 1/10 of the Shodai's necklace. And no doubt thieves, smugglers, bandits, and even missing nin were itching for some extra income through irreplaceable objects of history. The rest of us had the same conclusion, Shizune said. Though we're all wondering why the third didn't tell us anything other than that. And speaking of rumors, have you heard the one about Naruto? Kakashi nodded. Shizune smiled lopsidedly. Pretty crazy stuff, huh? Yet there's a grain of truth in the sack of lies. I know. Tsunade-sama told me it did happen, though not as flamboyant as the rumor mill tells it. She likely thinks that it's the you-know-what that did it. The Kyuubi, he thought. And she's sure? What other explanation should there be? She asked back. Point taken, he conceded. So, she said, how was your date yesterday? He looked away. He tried to act nonchalant, but Shizune already sensed the instant nervousness in his body language. It was okay, he said. That's not the same thing, she said. She scowled and crossed her arms. Honestly, Kakashi-san, you took her to a porn shop? Have you no tact at all? I told her beforehand that she shouldn't come with me, Kakashi explained, waving his hands in a gesture of, please don't kill me. The new Icha Icha Caribbean Chronicles just hit the shelves yesterday, and I was eager to get my hands on it. The shop got temporarily closed during lunchtime, and since we'd already eaten lunch I wanted to stay in front and browse the windowed items until they opened up again. It was a good call because there was only one copy of the book left. Oh, you mean this copy? Shizune had in her hands the book in question. Kakashi instinctively reached for his back pouch and fished out no book, only the 4 storage scrolls he placed there. How did you? She grinned, white teeth shining almost as brightly as Guy's. A sleight of hand, Kakashi-san. A simple sleight of hand. To be bested by a fellow Junin, he murmured, and attacking where it wounds me the most. You're sadistic as ever, Shizune-san. So? She shrugged, fanning herself with the inch-thick pocketbook. I believe you need a little punishment for that stunt you pulled yesterday. She's one of my best friends, Kakashi-kun. The tone of her voice then turned icy cold. And I look after my friends, regardless of our past together. Kakashi sighed. Around a year after the Kyuubi attack, he and Shizune dated for a while. The relationship had its ups and downs, but in the end, they broke up on a mutual agreement after 17 whole months being together. They remained friends, but not as close as they used to be. Ever since their breakup, there had been an invisible barrier keeping them apart, growing wider and thicker as time went by, that the term friends was now bordering acquaintances. There was a tense atmosphere whenever the two of them were alone. The tension got so thick that Shizune started addressing him more formally. She might have sounded hypocritical with her last sentence, with the way she wasn't doing a thing to break down the barrier between them. Though the same could be said for him, too, but he didn't think so. Their friendship withering away hurt him, but he kept the facade and acted okay with it. As stupid as it sounded, he needed to move on, too. I'll be sure to avoid those next time, Kakashi said. Who's to say my friend would want another date from you? I meant for other potential dates. I didn't say she did not want another date, either. Kakashi acted quick and chanced to grab for his precious book. His fingers touched the lower spine before Shizune yanked it until it rested next to her lower back. She was grinning all the way as if she had expected his predictable move. He knew what that grin was for. He closed his eyes, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and offered his sympathies to Shizune's future boyfriend. Her teasing games had been fun when they were dating, but their rotting relationship was now blocking that crucial emotional element, and Kakashi was feeling more annoyed than amused. Still, it was not a good idea to snap at her or wisecrack. The subdued approach would have to do, so he sucked up his pride and did it. May I please have my book back? He asked. It sounded perfect, pleading too. How mortifying. Shizune pursed her lips. She gave it back reluctantly. I'll leave you with a warning, Kakashi-san. Try anything funny again and She didn't need to finish her sentence to get the threat across. After Kakashi packed his smut book in his back pouch again, he nodded at her. And he would honor it, too. He was unsure what he felt about the female Chunin now. Before, they were just friends, fellow Konoha ninjas often pinned together in C and B rank missions, knew each other, but it had never crossed his mind that they could become something more. Truthfully, he was also a little apprehensive about taking their current relationship to the next level, afraid that it'd end the same way with Shizune. Botched and caused lasting damage. He might not take it well this time. Go for it, Kakashi-san, Shizune said. Her smile looked almost forced, although he couldn't be sure. You have my support. He looked away, didn't want to see how her smile differed greatly from the emotion in her dark eyes. It would spawn questions, and these questions would most likely complicate their relationship further. Better to move on and never look back. Yeah, thanks, he replied stiffly, which he didn't mean to come out that way. His voice became gentler when he asked, how long do you have before you meet your team? Not long now. She checked the sky and the position of the sun. Time for me to go. Kakashi merely nodded and watched her walk towards the park's exit. Shizune, he called, purposely saying her name informally. Shizune looked back, and even with their added distance he was sure that her cheeks were pinker than before. Stay safe, he said. Those two words brought back memories, a time when he was still in Anbu. It had been the other way around, though, where Shizune said those words to him before he was off to his last mission as part of the Anbu. She stood there, stunned for a few moments. He tried to smile at her, but he doubted she'd see the wrinkles forming on his mask. Almost like she had turned bipolar, she waved goodbye at him timidly and mouthed, I will, before dashing to the rooftops. I will. Those were his exact words to her back then, too. Now that their farewells had passed, Kakashi couldn't help feeling that their déjà vu parting had been an omen. Kushina, glad you could make it. Please, have a seat. She complied, taking the seat at her right, which was to the front left of the Hokage's desk. The old man's eyes followed her as she sat down, an indifferent stare partnered with a gentle, grandfatherly smile. Somehow, the image conjured hopelessness and despair than safety and peace. Their discussion didn't start yet and already Kushina hated and dreaded it. We have something to discuss that is of utmost importance, he said, taking a blue folder from his desk and presenting it to her. I'll assume that you know what Tsunade had written in her report. Hokage-sama, if I may, Kushina interjected, then waited for her leader to allow her to continue, which he did. I don't want to involve my son into this affair at all. I want to seek the bastard myself, yes, but the thought of Naruto-chan having to remember what happened to him. I don't want that. What kind of parent could want that? The Hokage looked solemn then, but neither did he sigh nor cry. He showed his own sympathy through subtle gestures and facial expressions. Most wouldn't catch them, but their effect still came. Sitting on the chair in front of him, looking torn between seeking justice and wanting what's best for her only child, Kushina was willing to defy her village leader to keep her son safe. Sarutobi looked torn as well. I understand your concern, Kushina, but you weren't really considering making Naruto-chan remember, were you? I'm afraid. He sighed as Kushina's face paled, eyes as wide as they could go. This must be resolved quickly. But Naruto-chan, you can't. Kushina, see reason. He tapped the folder twice. From what I read in Tsunade's report and also the one from the Anbu who found Naruto-kun, it clearly states that he had been kidnapped, left to die, and the most suspected is a Konoha shinobi. Why they didn't kill Naruto-kun then? He paused, hesitated when Kushina clenched her hands and gritted her teeth. We would never know, unless we apprehend him immediately. I have to think about Naruto-chan's safety first, she replied. She was as stubborn as Sarutobi remembered. And you are. Look at this way, Kushina. The culprit went after Naruto-kun most probably for the same reason as the other attempts on his life. They were after the Kyuubi's death. If the culprit had left Naruto-kun to die in that forest, he'd be expecting your son to stay dead. With the rumors I hear flying around the village, it'd be impossible to put Naruto-kun in hiding until this matter is resolved. No doubt he'd come back to finish the job. I've studied everything before I called you here. This kidnapping had been planned. He slipped through the patrols and the guards have stationed at your home this week. He chose the forest because it was away from civilization, perfect for killing and disposing a body. And he left nothing that could trace back to him. That is if his plan worked perfectly. Kushina rested her forearms on her thighs, shifting herself to the edge of the seat. She had been too busy worrying over Naruto that she forgot to put time on studying the crime scenes and the evidence left behind. No doubt Sarutobi had already conducted that. Sarutobi fished another folder from his desk, this one a blood-red color, opened it, and handed it to her. She took it without a word and started reading the sentences he had highlighted. We found traces of a fabric commonly used in Konoha ballistic vests. That narrows down our suspects to Chunin and Junin. Naruto-kun must have put up a fight before the kidnapper had gotten the upper hand. But how? It's just a theory, he answered, but I believe it has the most merit. According to Tsunade, Naruto-kun had been wheeled into the operating room already leaking out bits of demonic chakra. It was the Kyuubi's own way of saving his container's life, from what I could think of. Kushina wanted to say something, but kept her mouth shut. Sarutobi must have a reason for bringing that up. But then I asked myself, did the Kyuubi save Naruto-kun's life in another way? What if the fox was also the reason why the kidnapper did not kill Naruto-kun in that forest? There was a darker thought that could explain why Naruto was left for dead. The kidnapper wanted him to die alone and in agony. So what you're saying is, the seal must have momentarily weakened when Naruto-kun was close to dying, he finished. And in that, the release of demonic chakra made the kidnapper flee, not knowing that the seal can reinforce itself and contain it. Kushina turned her head back to the folder in her hands. But before it was contained, the Kyuubi somehow made Naruto-chan attack the bastard while engulfed in the demon's malevolent essence, she said, almost as if she were stating the obvious facts to herself to force her to believe it. Maybe this was the cause of Naruto's sudden appetite. And that's all it did. And the fabric? That's where the kidnapper made his mistake. Sarutobi smiled like a warlord spotting a weakness in the enemy's defense he could exploit. He yet again brought out another folder, this one white. He opened the folder, dug out a single sheet of paper, and returned the folder to its original place. The fabric on the vest is a material that had been used by only one particular store in Konoha. Ever been to Shinobi Arsenal? Kushina nodded. That was the shop where she had bought her custom-made ballistic vest, which consisted of both Konoha and Uzu designs. The owner, Mosuke, had invented a revolutionary design on our combat vests. He had cultivated a special kind of fabric which can absorb most attacks and more durable with ballistic and shrapnel damage. But he died before he could tell anyone how he made those fabrics. Yes, I've heard. My old armor had been his final work before his son took over the shop. Exactly. He was also quite secretive, saying that he'd only reveal how to create the fabric when he's comfortable telling it. But at least he told me that creating the special fabric is a time-consuming process, so he hadn't been able to mass-produce them at all. Kushina, somehow catching on to what the third was talking about, asked, "Did Mosuke-san keep a logbook?" He smiled and showed her the paper. In fact, he does. This is a copy of the list of buyers of his vests. They were a rarity since Mosuke concentrated on making Enbu combat vests and forging new weapons, so we've narrowed down the list of suspects to 20. There are 32 names on this list, Kushina informed. 10 of them died in the Kyuubi attack. One died when the Kumo emissary was close to escaping the village with Hinata Hyuga. His vest had been heavily damaged. The last one committed murder-suicide on her boyfriend before setting their apartment on fire. Kushina winced. She remembered that incident. The girl was a friend of Kakashi, and he had been devastated when he heard the news. Whether Sarutobi was sorry for bringing up painful memories or not, she was unsure. His face remained indifferent but tired. As you can see, Kushina, everything is under control. But I cannot proceed anymore unless I want the culprit to figure out that I am onto him. And so you want my son's testimony to let him point the man who? The paper in her hand crumpled. Not like that, I give you my word. If all goes well, then Naruto-kun will never remember it again. What do you mean? I've assigned the Yamanaka clan's best mindwalker, Inoichi, to dive into Naruto-kun's psyche and review the repressed memories from that night. It'll be like he had slept through some surgery. Tsunade told her this before. Kushina just didn't believe it could be as easy. What's the catch? Nothing, he retorted. Please don't undermine the capabilities of your fellow shinobi, Kushina. They might think you're being condescending to them. Don't patronize me with that. Hokage-sama. Her voice was almost a shout. I'll talk to Mr. Yamanaka if it pleases you, and only then will I decide if I want this to continue or not. There's always a catch to something. Her bangs shadowed her eyes. I had to learn that the hard way. Sarutobi wanted to rebuke that cynical view of the world, but didn't have the words to back it up. Just like Kushina, he had been hardened by war, mourned for countless deaths, and trained to kill for what he believed in. And in some part of him, he agreed with her. The world does not give you fortune for free, and there are times when the things you receive are far less than the things you give in return. They were harsh lessons, ones that didn't really give an impact to anyone until they themselves experienced it firsthand. Kushina had been through this, just like he did. All for the sake of duty, of valor, of patriotism. But there were times when he was left to ponder things over, and he often asked himself, was it all for nothing? That's all I ask for, he said to her, glancing at the window overlooking the village. Inoichi will give you more details concerning the operation. At this time, he could be heading home from the torture and interrogations department. She stood from her chair, placed the crumpled list on his desk, and walked towards the door. I'll go see him, then. He couldn't see the expression on her face when she said that, but her hands, which were still clenched into fists, told him all he needed to know. I got it. Naruto looked up from cooking his special homemade ramen and saw his mindscape companion, currently going by the name of Really, entering the kitchen with a skip in its step. Got what? Naruto turned the stove off, added the flavor packet into the pot, and stirred it while humoring the little sheep. I finally figured out the perfect name. Oh really? He then snickered. Yes, Really said, ignoring the pun, and it's perfect for me. Very exotic and sends a chill down your spine, too. I doubt you'd have a better name than the ones I've thought of, really a you. You mean names like Ramstein, Dewey, and Sheepy? Dude, all of them point back to me being a sheep. And I'm a ram not a you moron. I'm going to ram you. Stop it with the pun jokes already. What else is there for me to do? What? Solitaire. Gets boring. Eating ramen, which I know is just a figment of my imagination, since my younger counterpart is the one eating real food. Conjuring hot chicks for some ramming? Now who's the one doing the jokes? That one's ironic, not a pun. You got a point. And I don't conjure hot chicks because like with the ramen, he gestured to the pot he was stirring, it's not real. Then think of it as a wet dream. Which would carry on to my counterpart, and he's too young to be ejaculating. Quote. I give up. Naruto just shrugged at him. He turned back to the stove, grabbed the boiling pot, and poured the contents into the bowl set at the next counter. So, your name? Oh, right. I realized that you have a fixation of my name referencing to my species. Sheep are nice, yes, he mused. You can't spell ramen without ram, right? He started eating the delicacy. One eye twitch later, which is somehow amazing since Naruto doesn't remember ever seeing a sheep do the eye twitch, Really said, well, I thought up a name that'll make both of us happy. It keeps up with your sheep motif, and it's a name I'm satisfied with. Okay, so tell me already. I'm anxious to know it. The sheep took a deep breath. Then said, my name is now officially Rambo. Naruto went into a coughing fit, almost choking on his noodles. He stared at Rambo, wanting to laugh, wanting to roll on the floor and laugh his own ass off, needing to create an outlet for the boundless mirth rising inside him. But it was not meant to be. He just said, huh. And that was not a question. Naruto had gotten an epiphany. When he took time to think over the past events in this new world and what had occurred to his counterpart, it made him want to bash his own head at the apartment wall. It was basic procedure, after all. How could he have missed the fact that adding repressed memories and violent attack together in one particular case would most likely end up with the patient being subjected to a mind scan by a member of the Yamanaka clan? Took you long enough to figure it out, Junko, Rambo said as he studied Naruto's rapid change of facial expressions. From carefree to worried, from worried to panicky, from panicky to self-loathing. It was somehow entertaining to watch. Naruto turned to the sheep. You mean you knew this whole time? And didn't think of telling me about it? What's the harm in a Yamanaka mind scan, anyway? It's not like Junko has anything to hide. Naruto waved his hands around the room. Define, hide, my sheepish friend. You have a point. He looked down at the green carpet and then back to Naruto. How about we act natural? Right, Naruto drawled, glancing at the grass-looking carpet, and pictured himself eating it with Rambo. They'll never see it coming. Hey, at least I'm thinking up ideas rather than panicking. And besides, we have loads of time to think of a plan to hide without looking like we're hiding. Naruto really wanted to comment on that last sentence. Hiding that you're hiding something? Talk about underneath, but didn't. He instead said, you're right. No time for panic, but plenty of time for brainstorming. Well, good luck with that, Junko. Why do you insist in calling me Junko? I have my reasons, Rambo said cryptically before sauntering off to another room. A new room Naruto had conjured for the sheep's personal space. They didn't like the idea of sleeping in the same room together. Naruto did not push further, seeing that it was another odd quirk given to Rambo when he had been conjured. So when Rambo closed the door to his room, Naruto decided to pay another tenant inside this mindscape a little visit. It was a visit he didn't want to rush into because his last, which was also his first in this world, visit hadn't ended in a good way. Time to see if the furball had calmed down yet, he stated out loud, and walked outside the apartment. Upon exiting, he was unceremoniously dropped around 3 feet below and landed on the same ankle-deep water inside the sewer-like maze that led to the seal of the Kyuubi's prison. Naruto had intended to interrogate the fox after he figured out why aka Naruto was inside this place, but after learning everything he could about his current predicament he called it off, wanting to delay that inevitable visit for a much later time. There was no rush because it was not like he and his younger counterpart were in any imminent danger. So a visit would most probably bring more of a headache than unconditional help from the big, bad fox. Besides, he didn't like the dingy look of the sewer maze. Who knew what kind of contaminated water was invading the skin of his feet right now? But why stop delaying the visit when there was no need to rush? It was simple. A Yamanaka mind walker would no doubt come into this mindscape, but they'd be coming in unprepared because they didn't know just how manipulative the fox could be even in its limited freedom inside the seal. The old Sengama, Tr. Sage Toad, Fukasaku, couldn't help Naruto gather natural energy for his sage mode because the fox would interrupt the flow at every turn. The same might as well be said for any mind walker brave enough to enter the head of a Jinchuriki, but more dangerous because for Fukasaku's case, he didn't dive deep into Naruto's psyche, which could not be said the same for the selected Yamanaka. If Naruto wanted this to run smoothly, he needed to keep the fox sedated, for lack of a better word, while the mind walker roamed his counterpart's memories. He had thought about repelling the mind walker similar to what the Kyuubi had done to the old Sengama, but dismissed it as a stupider approach. Blocking any attempts of finding out the culprit of aka Naruto's near-death experience would be a bad move and would most likely waste a lot of time and resources for an alternative investigation. Not to mention that Mizuki wouldn't let this stop with just one attempt. Aka Naruto was probably still in danger, and the sooner they figure out Mizuki was the culprit, then the better for everyone. Another reason would be the Yamanaka's persistence of the matter. Naruto wouldn't put it past a clan member to try until he succeeded, which might lead to more damaging consequences on his counterpart's brain, since being the receiving end of a Yamanaka mind technique too many times becomes equivalent to being subjected to an Uchiha's first attempt at Tsukuyomi. Nasty. The fox problem could be taken care of, no problem, no worries. What Naruto was really worried about was what the Yamanaka's reaction would be if he discovered that there was someone else lurking inside the child's mindscape. It would be quite a sight. A Yondaime lookalike and a talking sheep named Rambo. The latter was most certainly insanity personified. Then again, he could be categorized alongside Rambo. For some reason, as he made his way through the maze towards the fox's big, bad cage, he couldn't help pitying the unlucky Yamanaka who would be assigned for the mind walk. Inoichi Yamanaka had been expecting a redhead to come talk to him soon. Most likely sometime today. He guessed it right when Kushina Uzumaki leaned on the outside wall near the entrance of Konoha's torture and interrogation department, her arms crossed over her chest, her whole posture screaming that she was waiting for someone specific to come out of the building. Kushina was a woman of godlike beauty, with her knee-length crimson hair and endearing smile blessed upon a face that could rival even the most proclaimed of beauties in the world. Her smile always enchanted him back when he was a teen, still rough around the edges and needing more years of life experience to make it out on his own and his ninja career. Out of all the times that he had been on a joint mission with her, they'd only known each other by name. Even with a non-existent closeness between them, Inoichi found a sort of blissful peace whenever she smiled, like she was channeling her happiness to the outside world. She wasn't smiling now. Along with her crossed arms, her eyebrows were forming a frown. Inoichi braced for the worst, since Kushina's temper had been compared with legendary proportions. The one thing every ninja who collaborated with her agreed on was that you'd be signing your own death sentence if you ever anger the fiery redhead. Luckily for Inoichi, he hadn't been the short end of the stick whenever Kushina was in one of her bad moods, but that just made her the more fearsome now. It was always much more frightening when you were facing the unknown. He hoped that the anger she was emanating was not directed at him. He still had a daughter to raise. "Good afternoon, Uzumaki-san," he greeted. It was only proper, and he doubted her breaking the ice would be gentle. "How are you today?" "Fine, good afternoon to you, too," she replied hastily. Her expression remained unchanged. "You're gonna catch wrinkles if you scowl so much," he quipped. "Right," she drawled. "If I need that kind of advice from a man who has to look intimidating for his job, which can't be complete without the scowl, I'll be sure to ask you." Ouch. Shikaku was right. She did have a very sharp wit for jokes and insults. "You're here for the proposal, I assume?" he asked. She nodded at his question. "Walk with me, then." He gestured to his right where the road to his destination was littered with people and a few street stalls. Yet another busy day in the late afternoon in Konoha. She eyed him questioningly. "I need to pick up my daughter from the park," he answered, and started walking. He caught her nodding again before matching her pace with his. The angle of the sun suggested that the time was between the 16th and 17th hour of the day. He didn't delay the inevitable with small talk. "Hokage-sama wants me to personally do the operation. And what are your thoughts on that?" she asked. He thought over his reply before speaking. "Probably the quickest way to get a face description on the culprit, although it's not an operation without its risks." Risks? The way her head whipped at his direction and her voice mixing with a hint of suspicion. It was like she had grown distrustful of everyone but her close friends and the Hokage. He then thought back on her son's medical report, listing down the amount of injuries that had been inflicted on his person that night. If it had been any other child, they would have died long before the criminal had finished, saving them the torture of going through more of that hell. Naruto had been lucky that his stomach tenant gave him that nifty healing factor. Seeing the situation at this angle, Inoichi seemed to understand Kushina's distrust until the culprit had been unmasked. "Not to your son, I assure you," he said. Her face softened a bit, her tense shoulders lowered, but with the untrained eye it would be impossible to detect. "I'm more worried about how deep a connection your son has with the you-know-what, and what it could do to me once I enter his mind." "Is it dangerous?" "Again, not to your son. Practically every scenario I can think up often has only me who gets hurt." "Then you." She gave pause, unsure what to say. Then, "Do you think it's worth the risk? Why are you even asking that?" It was his turn to frown, head whipping at her direction. "The Hokage approached me, asking me to do an operation I have done countless times in my career. The only difference with this new one is that I'll be mind-walking a Jinchuriki, who is also your 5-year-old boy. I know the risks involved, but that doesn't stop me. The Hokage asked me, not ordered me. I had a choice, and I chose to accept." Kushina halted her steps and he followed suit. He waited for her response. Her expression seemed to shift, as if she was in utter disbelief, or maybe she wasn't sure what she was feeling in that moment. Shaking her head, she replied, "I didn't know that." "Not at all. Sorry. There's nothing to be sorry for." They continued their walk in silence for the next 3 blocks. Judging from her body language, Inoichi learned that Kushina was feeling quite curious over what he had said. To tell the truth, he was also curious over his reply. He didn't mean to blurt everything out in just one sitting, let alone tell the woman that he was sacrificing his personal safety all for the sake of this little mind walk, which could be avoided if he had said no to the Hokage at the time. But to him, rejecting the mission was not an option. Some would think that it was a very noble act for a shinobi, but they'd be wrong. Nothing could be given for free, and if there were something really great offered, one had to be prepared for a hefty price. If there wasn't one, then the only other option of payment would be ulterior motives, hidden away beneath the masks, beneath the fake smiles, beneath the shout of bargains and super cheap prices. Inoichi had one such ulterior motive, but it was not malevolent. Attraction towards the opposite is a normal thing to feel when you're a teenager. Deep admiration, however, was an attraction sprouting roots and growing inside the heart. His attraction towards Kushina had long since withered away when she set her eyes on another, but the roots laid their claim on a place in his heart and weren't about to stay still and be uprooted. First loves were always diehard little things. The park came into his view and grew closer as they walked side by side. Once, Kushina opened her mouth, probably about to ask him something, but she ultimately kept it closed and her stare forward. There were times when he felt like she was looking at him through the corner of her eye, but instead blamed it on mind tricks. Konoha Park was not as open as the word of mouth said it was. It had been constructed during the village's founding, so the architecture took into account the chances of it becoming a fortified base of operations if ever any of Konoha's enemies decided on a full-scale assault on their soil. Today, with war not as profound and primitive as it had been decades ago, the park's design became livelier and friendlier for villagers to come and relax with their families, though there were still remnants of the olden days. The whole lot's perimeter was fenced over by a 4-foot-long wall made of Iwa's purest and sturdiest bricks. Iwa masons had been, and still are, regarded as the most genial workers of creating very strong construction materials, toppled by a 7-foot-tall chain-link fence. Inoichi and Kushina entered the park through one of the 4 large brick archways that faced the 4 cardinal directions, north, east, west, and south. Making their way through the paved path towards the park's playground, Inoichi kept his eyes peeled for someone sitting on one of the many benches inside the enclosed park. He found her on the bench nearest the playground, watching over Ino, who hadn't spotted him yet. The woman in question was his mother-in-law, Kaoru Hakafuna. Ever since the death of his wife, she took it as a mission to be there for Ino when Inoichi had to go to work. He didn't like leaving his daughter alone, but at least he found solace in the knowledge that she was in the caring hands of her grandmother. "Well, I'll be," Kushina murmured, but it was loud enough for him to hear, even with the constant shouting of joy and excitement from the children playing near them. "What?" Inoichi asked, seeing her staring at the playground. He followed her line of sight and saw one scene that put a smile that mimicked Kushina's own. "That's Naruto, right?" He had heard from the Hokage that Naruto was not the outgoing type, a complete contrast to his own daughter, actually, who loved making new friends, be it night or day, and often liked to keep to himself. Many times when he had come here to pick up Ino, he saw the red-headed boy sitting under the largest birch tree in the park, reading a book. A trait he no doubt inherited from his father because Inoichi didn't think Kushina was one who liked hitting the books in a leisure time sense. But today that particular tree lost its frequent visitor and only his book was left behind. Naruto was now playing with the other children, but never left the side of one child his age. "Yeah, that's him," Kushina replied. "And I'm guessing that the girl next to him is your daughter?" He nodded. Ino took up much from her mother in the personality department. Kokura had always liked meeting new people. It seemed that her daughter turned out the same. Ino and Naruto were swinging and climbing merrily inside the playground's jungle gym, their bright-colored hairs easily spotting them out among the dark-haired kids playing along with them. Even from afar, Inoichi could see the large grin plastered on the young boy's face, and he just had to sigh. It was not out of wariness or disappointment, but content. Ino was probably Naruto's first friend, and for some reason, the boy's smile seemed to channel the same kind of happy radiance like his mother's. It did his heart good to see the next generation going along life with a happy mindset. "It's the first time," Kushina told him all of a sudden. "Excuse me? It's the first time I've seen Naruto-chan playing with kids his age. He doesn't blend well with the others. Is it because of his burden?" Inoichi saw the boy's hesitation to make friends as a sign that the other children's parents were forcing them to stay away from him, as if he were a leper that needed to be avoided. "Not really," she pursed her lips and thought. "It's just that Naruto-chan is naturally shy. I don't know where he gets it, though. Minato and I had many friends when we were young. And admirers, too," he thought. Don't forget admirers. He was probably dragged by Ino to come play with her. "Your daughter dragged my son?" She smiled lopsidedly at him, one eyebrow raised up. "Takes after her mother," he said, displaying a mischievous smile of his own. "It's a wonder that my wife made more friends than enemies that way. It's also surprising to see her associating with Naruto. No offense to him, of course. It's just that Ino is a victim of peer pressure. Most kids don't like to play with loners. And some parents just don't like associating with him, not even giving a valid reason why," she replied bitterly. But at least not all people feel that way, Uzumaki-san, someone said behind them. It was a voice Inoichi was familiar with. Ah, Kaoru-san, good afternoon, he greeted her mother-in-law. Kaoru was already reaching her 7th decade, but she was as active as any woman that hadn't reached 30 yet. That is, without the difficult physical exertions and such. She was garbed in the traditional red fire country noble robes, an outfit fitting for her since she was the fire daimyo's cousin. Good afternoon, Inoichi-kun, she greeted back. Good afternoon, Hikafuna Dono, Kushina greeted with a low bow, recognizing whom she was talking to. Ah, a youngster with respect, Kaoru remarked, looking at Kushina then to Inoichi. You should learn from her example, She laughed good-naturedly. Inoichi couldn't contain a smile as he shook his head, while Kushina looked at them in confusion. Inoichi-kun here actually called me, Oba-san, during our first meeting, Kaoru elaborated, eliciting a poorly muffled snort from the female redhead. And in front of my cousin, the fire daimyo, no less. Ha ha ha. Ever since then, she never lets me live it down, Inoichi added. He wasn't sure if he was blushing, but it didn't really matter. He'd blame it on the setting sun. I hope Ino hasn't been much of a handful today, Kaoru-san. Not really, no, she answered, to which she had gotten a raised eyebrow from him. Okay, maybe a little. She emphasized it with a, just a teeny bit, gesture. She scraped her knee while trying to climb a tree. I was glad it was just a scratch. Well, at least she made a new friend out of it. She pointed towards the jungle gym where Naruto and Ino had climbed to the top, sharing the spot with each other, grinning like they were the best of friends. Instant friends, huh? He mused. That's the Hikafuna charm, Kaoru remarked. Very high charisma. Somehow, this scene feels a little nostalgic. Of course it does, son-in-law. You and my daughter, Kokura, had climbed that same jungle gym together when you and her first met. He had something to reply to that, but taking one look towards Kushina, he decided that it was better to keep quiet. Looks like they're coming our way, Kushina announced. Ino and Naruto had descended the jungle gym with haste, then Ino grabbed Naruto's hand and pulled him along as she dashed towards them. The boy didn't seem to loudly protest the fact that he was being dragged around the place by a girl. Daddy, Ino cried, smiling and pulling Naruto closer to her as they stopped in front of the adults. Meet my new friend, Naruto. Inoichi took this time to examine the boy. He was frail and thin, something that hadn't been done from malnutrition alone but also a side effect caused by demonic chakra exposure. It was like the child had a constant loss of appetite. He was also looking at the ground all the time, as if he had this twisted belief that he was the lowest of the bunch, unfit to have his head held high and a voice to speak out his ways. Kushina saying he was shy was an understatement. The kid seemed more of an introvert who was unwilling to let anyone but very close friends in his company. Inoichi looked at his daughter and wondered if the saying, opposites attract, had a hand in this odd friendship tandem. Naruto breathed deeply, glanced over at his mother for a split second, and bowed at him. GG good afternoon, sir. He sounded like he hadn't been using his voice for a while. Good afternoon, Naruto. Inoichi gently placed a hand over his head, making sure to let his intentions be as clear as crystal for him. He figured that the boy hadn't experienced much physical contact outside from the ones he got from his mother and occasional babysitter, Kakashi, so he realized right away that Naruto almost cringed but still welcomed the unexpected contact. If not, he would have swerved his head away and stepped back by now. Did you have fun playing with Ino? Naruto nodded. What was once an unsure expression turned into a happy one. Yes, sir, a whole lot. Ino tapped her new friend's shoulder and introduced her grandmother as well. Naruto greeted her with the same kind of respect. He then turned the tides on Ino and introduced her to his mother, who had been standing just to the left of Inoichi, keeping silent until it was time to let her presence be known. With a mischievous aura surrounding Ino, she mimicked what Naruto had said in his greetings. It brought a good laugh to him and the others, even Ino herself. Come on, princess, it's time for us to go home. Ah, do we have to? Ino pouted. He tried his best not to fall prey to her puppy pout charm all the time, and he was glad his resistance was strong and unrelenting today. Yes, Ino, we have to. He thought it over for a moment, glancing at Kushina before she said what he had intended to. Which district do you live in? She asked him, and he told her where. That's not too far from where we live. How about we walk home together? Kushina liked to think that she had a firm grasp on people's personality after the first conversation. While she hadn't had much interaction with Inoichi Yamanaka, he was by far the hardest male she tried to figure out. Not even Itachi Uchiha had been difficult to figure out. Well, she wasn't exactly intending for the blonde mindwalker to warm up to her like she did with the stoic Uchiha Chunin. But the general approach often had the same results despite the intent. She wasn't looking for a friend, though she couldn't say she'd refuse being friends with him. The guy was all right, so she didn't hold back when she began questioning him about the operation. Ever since the first assassination attempt on her son's life, she had been more cautious in dealing with new people and acquaintances. While the assassin had been caught before he could begin his so-called demon-killing duty, the fact alone that there had been a villager bold enough to want to kill an innocent one-year-old without remorse put her on edge. She didn't see any of these hidden intentions from Inoichi Yamanaka, but it was impossible to conclude that after just one meeting with him. Doubting his honesty, however, would be a very bad move, and Kushina did her best to believe in him. The Hokage trusted him with this operation, so it should stand to reason that she should trust him, too. But there was something about him that she didn't want to associate with. Something she was unsure of, but it made her feel very uncomfortable, like palpitations. Still, that didn't mean Inoichi was a bad character. Though her heart believed he was uncomfortable to be close to, her instincts told a different story, shoving Kushina with a more positive outlook of the Yamanaka. She didn't understand the presence of such contrasts within her very being, all because of just one man. She hadn't felt this way ever since. She stopped dead in her tracks, prompting the party of five to look back at her ashen face. She shook her head vigorously, as if trying to flick sweat off her brow. All it did was make a mess out of her long red hair, where some of the crimson strands stuck to her face. While this was going on, her mind was in a rapid intrapersonal discussion about the validity of her heart's supposed claim. It was most definitely a fluke, she decided to herself. There was just no way that she could actually be attracted to Inoichi Yamanaka, an acquaintance, a mere goddamn acquaintance, people. It was just unnatural. Then again, didn't she have this auto-discussion when she was unsure of her feelings with Minato? Uzumaki-san, is something wrong? That insufferable man asked. She liked to believe that her ears heard a tone of worry in that sentence, but ultimately summed it up to delusions, mind tricks, involuntary auto-suggestion, whatever the hell it could be called. As long as it was far from accusing her of what the village teen girls like to call, taking a fancy to him. She was not a lovesick teenager anymore. No way in hell. I'm fine, she lied. Just remembered something I needed to do later. You looked more like a woman who found out her husband has cheated on her than someone who had remembered something she had forgotten, Kakashi remarked, looking away from his For Dummies book to state that before diving back into it. Funny, she never thought Kakashi to be the type who likes reading an instructional book about babysitting. But damn, he could be perceptive if he wanted to be. Oh ha ha, very funny, she drawled. Sarcasm was a good way to deviate the guilt, as long as it wasn't important enough to require added attention. Before anyone would know it, they'd be moving on to a new topic as their brains slowly disintegrate any remembrance of her sudden halt. Ah, the wonders of short-term memories. Come on, let's go. Inoichi looked skeptically at her, but kept his mouth shut. Good, that added some brownie points for him. As they continued their walk, no longer thinking back about earlier, Inoichi stayed silent for a few moments. Then, Uzumaki-san, he began. Kushina was halfway from opening her mouth to tell him that it was really nothing and that he shouldn't stick his nose into it. But the way his eyes looked at her, she had the sudden uncomfortable palpitations again. Not to mention the stomach butterflies. What do you say, huh? Was her smart reply. About the proposal. The operation cannot proceed without your consent. What is your decision? Kushina bit her lip. She looked towards the others. Kakashi was busy with his book. Naruto, Ino, and Kaoru were conversing about something or other, not hearing her and Inoichi's own little conference. Before I decide, she said, can I ask you a question? Go right ahead. She was curious about a lot of things, questioning almost everything in the real world. It was like a compulsion for her to know as much as she could about her environment and the people around her. Of course, these were her odd quirks back when she had been a hyperactive child. So when she had gotten older, these compulsive urges had simmered down dramatically, but she was still affected by it every now and then. This time, she was curious about Inoichi's purpose. No matter how many times she thought about it, there wasn't actually anything for him to gain other than cash. Yet this man was willing to risk his life, even when he had a daughter to take care of, just to get a facial description of a criminal who could still be caught if they decided to take the hard way. So what was motivating him, she wondered. She really needed to know. Why continue when you aren't so sure if it'll succeed? Or if you'd actually. She stopped. There was no need to finish it. The point was still brought out in the open. If you'd actually survive? Inoichi looked at her and offered a grim smile. It reminded her of a dying man, of Minato. Because it's the right thing to do. Inoichi Yamanaka breathed deeply, pushing it out in the same rhythm as he had done 10 times before. Inside one of Konoha Hospital's ORs reserved for this special operation, he had been assigned with 2 fellow Yamanakas who will be his assistants. Well, assistant was not a very accurate word for it. They were more like supporters if ever something went wrong during the operation, prepared to jack him out of Naruto's psyche when signs of the Kyuubi interrupting the mind walk appear. He took a few last moments to let his eyes wander towards the sole window of the OR that was connected to the observation deck, and offered a small smile to Kushina Uzumaki, who would be watching the proceedings. Alongside her was the Hokage himself, his face grim-looking. His eyes wandered back to the operating table in front of him, where 5-year-old Naruto Uzumaki was laid down, sedated and bounded to the table. Having the patient bound was standard operating procedure, especially in the case of deep mind walks. Inoichi preferred using the full-body bind that he and his clan members use in the T&I department, but those were specialized for prisoners, not patients, and the Hokage disapproved of its use on the boy. Frankly, he didn't see the reason for the disagreement, but the Hokage's word was almost like a law you had to follow, so there was no choice in the matter. After Naruto had been sedated, the hired seal master, Jiraiya, placed special seals all over the boy's head. The sage explained that they were seals for both suppression and amplification. The former for the Kyuubi's chakra, and the latter for Inoichi's technique. It would serve him well, Jiraiya had assured him, and Inoichi trusted his word for that. What he still worried about was if these precautions were enough to prepare him for the journey ahead. It took him by surprise to hear Kushina agreeing to the operation. He thought she'd be stubborn and quite overprotective, but it seemed she had understood that doing this was for the best and the quickest in nabbing the culprit, who was still at large and probably plotting another attack. She also said that she would only agree if he and the Hokage agreed to one condition: she would watch everything during the operation. Almost a day later, he was now standing inside an OR with an observation deck and about to face an unknown variable not found in other patients of his mind-walking technique. Like with Kushina's temper, it scared him to think about what would happen to him when he entered the mind of a Jinchuriki, but he showed little or no fear to anyone. This was something he agreed to, and backing out now could only be labeled as cowardice. He was a ninja, and being called a coward was one of the worst taunts you could get. "Whenever you're ready," Inoichi Senpai, the assistant to his left, announced. The one on the right gave a nod of agreement. He gave each of them a nod back, stole one final glance at the observation deck, and grabbed Naruto's head. Muttered words of the technique's chant. And he dove right in with ease. The mindscape rumbled. It reminded Naruto of when a battalion of sound ninja had breached through their fortified relief station, shaking the foundations like an enraged earthquake, unbalancing even the sturdiest support columns of the building. With practiced ease, and he really practiced this part, Naruto headed out of the mindscape apartment, bypassing the special dome he had conjured around it, which would keep it invisible to everyone but him and Rambo, and searched for his target. The target was currently breaching through the subconscious defenses inside aka Naruto's memory section. The Yamanaka walker had full intentions of finding the specific memory and getting the hell out of the dodge once he did. Naruto smiled at that, but he still needed to watch over the invader. Wandering eyes were strictly prohibited while he and Rambo were still in here. He had to make sure that the Yamanaka stayed true to his given objective, and probably help him out in the shadows. The last thing Naruto wanted was a confrontation. He had been hard at work in preparing for this moment, not only because there would be an invader inside the mindscape but also because he was about to field test the experimental seals he had been working on a few months prior to his transdimensional traversing. The seals were more or less containment seals specifically made for demonic chakra suppression. For the Kyuubi's case, even 100 of these seals drawn to his cage were not enough to suppress all of its chakra, but with the right tools and modifications, Naruto had been able to redirect the seal's primary purpose. While most of the primary purpose was left alone, he had added in a secondary purpose, where the seal would tap into the Kyuubi's chakra pool and use that demonic chakra to reinforce the barriers it had been imprisoned in. Suppression and then redirection. Nothing other than that. It was cruel to further imprison an already caged animal, but seeing that Naruto and the fox hadn't come to a peaceful agreement when he had visited him yesterday, Naruto's hand was forced, so he had to resort to the seal. He was putting a lot of gambit into this because the modifications of the seal were still untested, but hey, what's life without taking chances? Besides, the less interruption from the nasty fox, the better his plans would go. And if anyone asked, he did not smile smugly and did a victory dance when the placed seals looked to be working just as he planned them to be. Nope, not at all. Slipping through the many sections inside the vast mindscape, he stopped near the location of the Mind Walker, stepping into the shadows quickly before he was found. It took by him surprise to see Inoichi Yamanaka there, climbing deeper into aka Naruto's memories. The memory section was like an office building modeled after the Hokage Tower's interior. Well, the Hokage Tower of this reality, but there really wasn't much of a difference between the two. They both have that squeaky door heading to the men's room on the second floor, after all. The place was made up of floors categorizing the boy's memories by year. The ground floor stored memories of his first year, fragments of what he could actually remember while his brain was still in the middle of cognitive development, anyway. The second floor was for his second year, and the list went on. The staircases alternated in place between floors. Ground floor staircase was in the west side, second floor in the east, third in the west, etc. So that the visitor would have to pass through the corridors of his memories on that particular year and work their way up to where they wanted to go. It was a little time-consuming, but this was a place created from his subconscious and thus had to be followed without question. Naruto was reminded of his early episode of reliving the memories of his red-headed counterpart, but he believed that phenomenon was different from this place. He had seen and understood those foreign memories, yes, but they were also vague, showing only still pictures and glimpses before moving on to the next set. He tried learning the difference between the phenomenon and the memory section situated separately from the mindscape apartment he had conjured, but with limited time to contemplate that while a mental crisis, a Yamanaka invasion, was just around the corner, he had to push that issue aside for now and concentrate on the main subject of concern. Still, it took Naruto a while to accept that the memory section and his instant memory recollection episode were a lot more different than he first thought. He had gotten to that conclusion when he climbed the steps and reached a particular floor. The strange thing about the building, though, was that it wasn't 5 stories high, as it should be since aka Naruto wasn't older than that, but 22 stories high. That raised some mental alarm bells for the 22-year-old blonde. He hadn't bothered exploring this section of the mindscape before because it was not like something instrumental was around here. He had been busy trying to gloss over what he should exactly do while the Yamanaka was rummaging around the 5th floor for that incriminating headshot of Mizuki Teme, and having the Kyuubi acting quite the very spoiled brat who didn't get his way, which was throwing a tantrum, didn't help ease things either. Seriously, it was what? Centuries old? The least it could do was act its age. Back to the building, if it was 22 stories rather than the obvious 5, what did that mean? It didn't take one knowing Kanai trajectory physics 101 to figure that out and act quickly. Since he had more privilege than a certain mindwalker, Naruto quickly teleported himself into the 5th floor, hasted towards the door leading to the 6th floor, and conjured a very convincing wall out of it. This way, Inoichi wouldn't think that there were floors higher than 5. He sensed him already climbing up the steps of the 2nd floor, so he made some last-second modifications to make the illusion look as convincing as possible and set out towards the 3rd floor. He tried to teleport again, but it didn't work. Ejecting himself out of the building was another bust, so that left one final option. Just like Inoichi, he now had to follow the rules set out by his subconscious. He would have to go through the corridors of his 5th and 4th year before he could reach his destination. Life-sized picture frames hung almost side to side on the walls of the 5th floor corridor, each picture animated to life as if they were windows to another world and time. One particular picture gave Naruto pause, and he decided to spare a few seconds to see what it contained. There he was, 5 years old and a boy filled with lively energy. He was standing in front of a towering crowd. If you were 5, every adult towered over you, and began to shout that he would be Hokage someday. Just wait and see. He touched the portrait, finding it was just that, a solid and flat surface of painted memories. The animation was just a special feature. The memory produced a ghost of a smile in Naruto's face, but that smile soon turned to worry when he realized something. This was his memory, not aka Naruto's. He suspected as much since there were 17 additional floors, but he moved towards another portrait. He saw his mother wearing only a towel, exiting the bathroom. A blush and a slack jaw were the products of such a sight, and he looked away quickly. Two things were for certain. This was aka Naruto's memory, and his alternate reality mom was looking good for a woman reaching her 30s. To sum up what he learned from the two frames, he realized that his and aka Naruto's memories had mixed together inside this place, because honestly, where would Naruto's memories be in other than the memory section? This prompted Naruto to curse lowly, realizing the new dangers of the situation. You just had to skip on exploring the memory section, he murmured mockingly to himself. Oh, I know what will most likely happen because I've wised up. Besides, I already learned everything I can about this world, so going there is useless. Just stick to the plan and everything'll smooth out in the end. Bull. Self-scolding aside, Naruto hurried to the stairs and took 2 steps at a time as he descended. The 4th floor corridor made him recall memories he'd repressed from his active memories, and most of them were not exactly pretty. Some made him cringe, some made him angry, and few made him punch the wall before imagining that he had never made an anger outlet out of the innocent wall, repairing it back to perfection. These memories had been repressed with good reason, Naruto supposed. If they had stayed, they would have changed who he was severely, and seeing his younger self other than the loud, devil-may-care prankster of the century facade was more than just an absurd thought. An impossible thought. Luckily for him, though, those repressed memories became repressed again when he exited the floor. It was like a cold hand had slipped into the inner parts of his head and installed a thick brick wall between him and the memories. It made him pause once more. That was another thing he found interesting inside this section, but he left these churning thoughts aside and concentrated on the present. Inoichi was taking his ample time in the 2nd floor corridor, moving his head left and right, looking at each of the animated portraits with a contemplative expression. It didn't seem like he was in a hurry, which was what he needed, despite that was the exact opposite of what he needed for his plan to continue flawlessly. Maybe he should have conjured an imaginary Shikamaru and asked for his opinion. He had forgotten the vital quote that kept his moniker of Konoha's most unpredictable ninja. No plan, no matter well thought out, survives first contact with the enemy. Improvisation was always the name of the game. Ninjas didn't just think of a strategy and believe that it was 100% foolproof. Even Shikamaru had backup plans for his backup plans. While improvisation was not exactly a good description for that, it did put the main point across that Shikamaru knew fully well the difficulties of keeping a plan as pinpoint precise as he had thought it out. There were unknown variables that could come at anything, anytime. To stick to a sole plan would just narrow one's perception. This was what Naruto had unknowingly done. He had been unpredictable as of late that he lived up to that moniker by being unpredictably ignorant of his shinobi teachings and his own misgivings of a strategy planned beforehand. He didn't know what could possibly be the cause of this, and he'd be sure to look into it later on. Now, however, he had to think up a new plan on the fly before Inoichi reached the door to the 3rd floor. The first 2 floors were flooded with nothing but fragmentary memories and were unlikely to be as important as the next floors up. He could still recall even the earliest memories of his childhood. Minus the repressed ones. The most earliest happened to be his 3rd birthday. The Sandaime decided to celebrate that October 10th with him, and it was here that Naruto had been introduced with the godly flavor of miso ramen from Ichiraku Ramen. It was a day he could never forget. For an intruder to realize that aka Naruto had memories that were not his own inside his mind, it'd spark a lot of worry and caution, and Naruto had no doubt that they'd think the Kyuubi had done more than just heal him. He didn't want to make his first appearance come in a bad light. It was hard enough trying to come to grasp that he'd be stuck inside this mindscape for the rest of his life, so he didn't want his stay here to be more uncomfortable and troublesome as it already was. Unfortunately, though, Naruto was stumped. He tried thinking over every scenario that could happen, but none of them could point to a peaceful solution or a chance to keep his presence unknown to the Mindwalker. He was fucked. And that was when something unexpected occurred. "Yo," Rambo said to Inoichi before he grabbed the doorknob, "fancy meeting you here." Inoichi immediately acted like any ninja who had been caught off guard, taking a defensive stance and putting distance between him and the supposed enemy. Though not all ninjas were that jumpy, he was truthfully caught by surprise because the last thing a mind walker would encounter inside a foreign mentality would be another sentient being not connected to the original consciousness of the mindscape. And as far as he knew, aka Naruto suffered no mental disorders, much less having a split personality. Then again, he doubted that a talking sheep could be regarded as a human's other self, or sanity. When Inoichi made no move to respond or ease up from his guarded stance, Rambo decided to break the ice a little more. "Not the least bit freaked out that you're talking to a sheep? He hasn't said a word to you yet, idiot," Naruto thought in the shadows. That's hardly qualified as talking to a sheep. Going back to the matter at hand, Naruto wasn't sure if this unexpected addition would be good for his plans. He clearly told Rambo that he should stay inside the apartment until the Yamanaka left the mindscape. He should have known not to trust a simple-minded, domesticated farm animal to listen to easy orders when the farm animal in question was as curious as a cat wanting to get killed. Satisfaction did bring back the metaphorical cat, but Naruto promised to kill him a second time. Just to be sure. Still, he made for a good distraction. A stupid distraction, but a distraction nonetheless. Any new plans he might have been able to come up during that small window of opportunity as Inoichi eyed the talking sheep with a calculating eye decided not to be conceived during those moments. It left Naruto stumped as Inoichi was finally seeing the harmlessness of his foe. Naruto was still fucked. He sighed heavily, clearly defeated. Not in the point one would think, but defeated in the belief that he could pull everything off with Inoichi ignorant of everything but Mizuki's crime. Naruto worked well under pressure, and he could adapt to any given situation, most, anyway. But he wasn't deemed godlike in military strategies and tactics, the whole cloak and dagger deal in the shinobi life. The trait that separated him from other ninjas of his generation was that he was an adaptable little prick. He thought on the fly, and one fights that way. Thinking up plans without enemy engagement did not arouse the attention of his life-saving trait. In other words, Naruto could only think up great plans if he were fighting a battle directly. It had always been a fact in his old world that Tsunade Ba-chan avoided mixing Naruto and covert assassination missions together. So there was only one thing left that he had to do in this dire situation: wing it. And he meant to truly wing it. With that imaginary weight gone from his shoulders, the haze that had been hovering inside his head cleared a little and he came across a satisfactory plan for what he was about to do. It was a little risky, but he wanted to take that chance. If the same history of how he had gotten the Kyuubi inside his belly was the same as in his old world, then this would work well to his advantage. I mean, the fox had mistaken him with his father. What was stopping Inoichi from making that same mistake? Just to be extra careful, though, he mentally willed a decent transformation of his father onto himself, using his meeting with him when he almost broke the seal during Pain's invasion as reference. There was also a strand in one of aka Naruto's memories where he was shown a family portrait of his father and mother, who was around 7 months along when the picture was taken, so he didn't doubt a possible error in his transformation. He stepped outside the shadows and approached Inoichi, who saw him and then tensed as he got closer. Naruto put his hands up non-threateningly. "At ease, shinobi, I'm only here to talk." "Who are you?" Inoichi questioned, his eyes narrowed. "I know you're not the Yondaime." Damn, suspected right off the bat. He didn't react to the accusation, though. It was just another snag in the plan. But no worries, Naruto's miraculous adaptation no jutsu was hard at work. "How can you be sure I'm not him? The Yondaime I know doesn't have whisker-like marks on his cheeks." Naruto's eyes widened, involuntarily reaching for his cheeks where, sure enough, he felt the rough texture of his birthmarks. Double damn, he had forgotten about those. Inoichi's eyes narrowed further, and he was subtly moving towards the door leading to the floor above. "I should have known you'd do something like this, Kyuubi. I'm not susceptible to any of your mind games at all." Inside his thoughts, he was annoyed that the seals Jiraiya-sama had placed for his protection didn't work. This was going downhill real fast, and Naruto was slowly losing his wit. But that did not mean he would give up. His creative mind, which was used to making up half-truths and lies during his pranking days, had a lot more ideas up its sleeve. The Kyuubi is pretty much disabled right now, Naruto said, keeping his hands up. I made sure of it. Why should I believe you? Inoichi remained subtle in his advancement towards the door, but Naruto made no move to stop him. That door wouldn't open if he didn't want it to, so his guest was stuck inside this floor with him whether the man liked it or not. I would have just imprisoned you, overwhelmed you with demonic chakra, threw chains around your limbs and ripped them to pieces, at least done something to consider me as an actual threat. And what's stopping you from doing that later? Do you think the Kyuubi no Yuko is into the shinobi's cloak and dagger profession? But foxes are known to be tricksters, are they not? That's true, but do I look like a fox to you? How do I know that's not just an illusion, like you've copied the face of Yondaime-sama? Naruto was unsure how to rebuke that. His appearance being in an illusion was true, after all. Why are you moving away from me? If cat got your tongue, change the subject. You assume I already trusted you, fiend? What's there not to trust? He gestured to his hands, which were still raised and weaponless. Do ninjas often answer a question with another question? Rambo asked all of a sudden. The two blondes turned to him, one eyebrow raised in confusion. You've been going at this, saying question after question, yet neither of you look to be answering them. It's like an old interrogation method I've heard about, Naruto answered. By sticking to questions in your responses, the receiver would somehow get the message to his subconscious that he wouldn't get much from me unless he started answering my questions. Perfect for curious civilians, milking them with information while retaining secrecy. Is that a mind game? No, it's more of an unproven theory in human behavior. It doesn't work all the time, so interrogators rely on other methods of information gathering. He's right, and the information he just stated is not accessible to a 5-year-old child, Inoichi interjected. Seeing an opportunity, Naruto retorted, which is also inaccessible to a giant demon fox. He wasn't sure if it helped his case, but the Yamanaka's belief that he was the furball was slowly crumbling. That, at least, was a bit of good news. If you are not the Kyuubi, then who are you? Naruto would have replied right away that he was the Yondaime Hokage, who sealed a portion of his chakra in the seal to aid his son when he reaches the 8-tail state, but that would be pushing his luck. Inoichi already realized that he was not the Yondaime Hokage, despite the facial resemblance, ignoring the birthmarks. Naruto was unperturbed, however, as he had a backup story in mind already. You may call me a being not of this world. Well, nice to meet ya, a being not of this world san, Rambo said. Has anyone ever told you that you have a really long name? Was that supposed to be a joke? Naruto asked. If you want it to be. Naruto mentally counted to 5, calming his annoyance. He told Inoichi, don't take him seriously. He's a little crazy. Not as crazy as the guy who talks to sheep, Rambo murmured. I heard that. He was tempted to have mutton stew for dinner. Not of this world? Inoichi asked, pushing their conversation back to the main topic. He cycled between observing the Minato look-alike and the talking sheep. A part of him wanted to issue a full psyche evaluation on Naruto after this operation. Having these two anomalies inside the kid's head was clearly unhealthy. Yeah, Naruto answered. He then grinned while crossing his arms, finding it too exhausting to keep them hoist up all day. You might say I'm the insurance the Shinigami placed on Naruto Uzumaki. Yet again, that weird feeling of talking to yourself in the third person came to him. The Shinigami? Yeah, Naruto believed that it was all the explanation needed to get his point across. And he just didn't want to divulge too much lest he slipped and said something that didn't happen in this reality. Inoichi pondered this for a moment. He then asked, when did you appear? Huh? The only times I know that Naruto came into contact with death, so to speak, were when his father sealed the Kyuubi the day he was born and when he had been pronounced clinically dead a few minutes before his heart restarted. I guess you could say both. What do you mean? Speak sense. I have a hard time figuring out most of the details, too, Naruto said truthfully. Now to twist the truth a bit. Perhaps I should show you my true form first. He undid the henge. What? The weird, huh? Naruto combed his flaky blonde hair with his right hand. My features are a combination of Minato Namikaze and Naruto Uzumaki. So what does that make you, really? Rambo asked. He shrugged. I'm probably their love child or something. Okay, that was an image Inoichi did not want to have. Just what are you and why are you inside Naruto's mind? And why is there a sheep in here, too? Would you believe me if I told you that I'm actually an interdimensional traveler who is also named Naruto Uzumaki, where I look more like my father than my mother, and that I stumbled into this kid's mindscape because I died in my old world using a suicide jutsu specifically created for the Rikudo Senin's use only, just so I could defeat Madara Uchiha from taking over the world through a global illusion? Saying it all in one breath, he inhaled deeply thereafter. Inoichi just looked at him as if he were mad. Then let's stick to the Shinigami's insurance theory, please, Naruto finished. I've been specifically placed here to help Naruto if there is ever a time he starts leaking the Kyuubi's chakra outside the seal willingly. The Shinigami placed you here for that? I thought Minato only dealt with the sealing and nothing more. Why would there be strings attached that is actually advantageous for Minato's side than the Shinigami's? Probably to keep the deal straight and bound. The Kyuubi is sealed inside Naruto's stomach, and the Shinigami believed it should stay that way until the time of the host's natural death. Consequently, that means I'm here to babysit, more or less. Then it must have been you who had done this to this place. What? Everything here, Inoichi said, gesturing to the corridor they were in, is form mimicking matter. I've been in countless minds before and they never had anything materialized such as in here. Just space as far as the eye can see. The inside of a person's mind shouldn't be this complex and organized. It just doesn't work that way. It works that way for me, Naruto replied. He didn't realize the implications Inoichi was saying. At least not yet. How exactly do you exist inside here? How exactly can a mortal man seal a malevolent and powerful demon inside an innocent infant? Inoichi grimaced. The Shinigami. Yeah, I almost forgot about that. Don't feel too bad. It's hard to keep track with all this info on such short notice. Another question. Why are you stopping me? I'm not stopping you, but helping you. I know why you are here. Oh? I can give you the strand of memory you are looking for right now. It'll save you the trouble of finding it. What's the catch? Naruto sighed. There was still a trust issue between them. I'm only trying to help. The faster you capture that white-haired bastard, the better. White-haired. Inoichi mumbled. A stray thought entered his head, and his eyes widened. It was impossible, but it also made a lot of sense. He could come to the Uzumaki household without being alerted by the Anbu. He could study their rotations and manage to nab Naruto and get out without their notice. He had knowledge of all forms of prolonging a torture session before killing the victim. And with the mention of white hair. You don't mean Kakashi Hitaki, do you? An eyebrow was raised. No, he deadpanned. It was someone else. Are you sure? Look, I don't think we'd get anywhere if we keep this up all day. Let me just show you the memory strand and you can start looking for the motherfucker. Language, Junko, Rambo said. We're in the kid's mind, after all. Rambo, Naruto said, do me a favor and shut up for 5 minutes. Does the favor need me to talk at one point? No, shutting up for 5 minutes is the favor. Then why'd you separate them? Naruto glared. Okay, shutting up now. Sheesh. Naruto turned back to Inoichi and stepped closer. Inoichi eyed him with caution but didn't take a step back. Despite the limited trust he was giving Naruto, he was willing to risk it and let the young blonde get a chance to prove his claims. Naruto was sure Inoichi was hoping that this bold move wouldn't come back to bite him in the ass or something of that line. He touched his forehead and within an instant the memory was passed to the Mindwalker. Inoichi blinked a few times, shook his head, and rubbed his eyes. That, he said, was weird. Better than going through 3 additional floors to get what you came for, right? Naruto grinned. That technique he pulled was something Ino had taught him after Konoha had been utterly decimated a final time. With her being the sole Yamanaka, she believed it was better that her techniques be of more use to all of her comrades than her dying along with her family secrets. Sadly, she died 2 days after teaching him this. Inoichi only nodded, he was still processing the memory given to him. His eyes then shot open in apprehension. Mizuki, that bastard, he growled. Mizuki, huh, Naruto mused, feigning ignorance. AKA Naruto didn't know Mizuki by name, so it'd be bad for him to act like he knew everything there was to know about the power-hungry slimeball who was willing to trade his own humanity for what he wanted. So Daiki-san gets the memory, mission complete, Rambo said. Can he go now? I thought I told you to shut up. You did, 6 minutes ago. Do you two always act like this? Inoichi interjected, not smiling, but there was still amusement twinkling in his eyes. Not all the time, Naruto answered. With only a sheep as company, it'd be bad if we ended up in non-speaking terms. Bad for you, anyway, Rambo said. Ignoring the jab, Naruto said, you got what you came for. Anything else you wish to know? No, nothing else, was Inoichi's reply. Though I will have to file a request for Naruto to have a psyche evaluation from me for the next 2 months. Why? To be sure he doesn't remember what happened to him 3 nights ago. That's all right. I got that one under control. And how did you manage that? By using Ino's memory repressing techniques, he answered in his head. Trade secret. I'm not buying that. Then take it for free. Today's a 100% discount sale. I'm not leaving till I get a proper answer. The ones who can repress memories, as far as I know, are members of my clan. Inoichi eyed Naruto's hair. And I'm sure that you're not a Yamanaka. I know a few techniques that transcend those of the living, he answered cryptically. Sadly, these techniques are forbidden for humans. Sorry. He didn't mean it, though. The building rumbled. Again, Naruto was reminded of that sound battalion breaching through the walls and floors. He doubted that there'd be another guest inside, aka Naruto's mindscape, so that left the other signal. The Kyuubi was fighting back its restraints, and winning. You need to get out. Now. Why? Inoichi asked, staying in balance as the building went through another powerful earthquake. What is that? The fox, Naruto answered simply before he gave Inoichi a big shove. Hey, what? He had more things to say, Naruto knew, but they would have to wait as he was unceremoniously ejected from the mindscape. Inoichi reeled back and almost fell on his back if not for one of the attendants catching him midway. He got back on his feet quickly and requested a status report. Everything checks out, sir, said the attendant to his right. The signs of demonic chakra were minimal in and around the subject's mind. The strange thing was, he hesitated, eyeing his partner for confirmation to continue. Was what? Inoichi echoed. When the left attendant nodded, the right one replied, the seals Jiraiya-sama put in place around the Shisho Fuin, tr. 4 symbols seal, were acting as if they were dormant, as if they were not being used at all, Inoichi finished. I think I know why. Huh? You do, senpai? Left attendant asked. Inoichi wanted to tell everyone about what he had seen inside that place. It was an experience he was not about to forget for the rest of his life. But he held his tongue. It was not because of fear or of confusion, but of excitement. He had dove into other minds before, each experience were as identical as seeing blood brothers side by side. There were obvious differences, but the generality of it was all the same. For Naruto's mindscape, however, it was different on so many levels, like trying to see the similarities between a male and female reproductive organ. For one, as he had stated to that Yondaime/Naruto lookalike before, there were sections inside his mind that had manipulated form into matter. Such creations were unheard of, even if that person were disciplined with the mind arts his whole life. Such complexities were far beyond human comprehension, and Inoichi hypothesized that the Kyuubi had something to do with this. The facts were incomplete, however. There were more sections there that were left unexplored. His mission was a priority above all else, hiding secrets and wonders that were probably far more mind-boggling than the Hokage Tower in there. He felt bad using the 2-month psyche evaluation as an excuse to discover more from the complex mindscape, but learning new things from a subject he thought he'd know almost all there was to know was invigorating, as if a passion in his soul had lit once more. But first and foremost, this new tenant inside Naruto Uzumaki had to be told to the Hokage ASAP. In other words, no one must know but Konoha's dictator. Yes, but I want to consult with the Hokage first before anybody else, Inoichi replied. Okay, wrap it up, boys. The operation was a success. He looked at the observation, saw Kushina looking eagerly for any good news from him, and gave her the thumbs up. This was also given to the Hokage, who understood the sign enough. The mission was a success, but there was a twist involved. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.